degrees. In Smiths Falls, also minus 26. Here's what's making news in Ottawa and the Valley. Cold. It's just cold. A blast of Arctic air into eastern Ontario, prompting extreme cold warnings, sending temperatures and wind chill values into dangerous territory. Not quite record-breaking, but cold enough that exposed skin can freeze in a matter of minutes. Here's City News reporter Jason White.
The reason for today's frigidity is the polar vortex.
It's always there, that polar vortex, waiting in the wings, if you will. And yeah, we've got a little piece of it that has slipped over us for today.
Meteorologist Jill Taylor says the wind chill value today will range from minus 38 up to minus 24 this afternoon. And the daytime high temperature will be just minus 18. On top of Environment Canada's extreme cold warning, the City of Ottawa has issued its own frostbite warning. Jill says frostbite can happen today in as little as 10 minutes. But this cold isn't bad enough to set a record.
We are not looking at any record cold for a January 11th for today. It just certainly feels extra cold.
Milder temperatures are on the way for tomorrow, but this bitter cold plans to make a comeback on Friday. Jason White, City News.
And right now, feeling like it's minus 30. It's minus 26 degrees in Ottawa and in Smiths Falls. The highest number of COVID patients in the ICU admitted in a single day. That is just the latest COVID figure now from the province. Here's City News reporter Jamie Pulfer.
The Ontario Hospital Association is now reporting some pretty big numbers, with 465 adult patients with COVID-related illness in our ICUs. That includes 80 new admissions. What's big about that number is that it is the highest number in all of the waves of this pandemic. Now, we're just hearing that Health Minister Christine Elliott, she'll be joined by the CEO of Ontario Health to provide an update on the province's health system capacity. That is going to be happening at 12:30 this afternoon, so we'll keep you updated on that. Booster shots, also a big deal when it comes to the battle against Omicron. Kids in that 12 to 17-year-old age group are still in limbo when it comes to third doses in Canada. The age group has been given the booster green light, those stateside. Now, for those who have had a booster, how long will this actually last? Dr. Bruce Mazer is part of a task force studying immunity to help inform government policy.
For individuals who are healthy and have a good immune system, it's highly likely that the third dose will hold them for quite a while, but only time will tell.
Fourth doses are already being rolled out to some high-risk groups in this country. Jamie Pulfer, City News.
City News time, 9:03. Another sign of growing pandemic fatigue. The latest Leger poll suggests 56% of Canadians support the latest round of lockdowns and restrictions, but 31% don't think Omicron is as serious a health risk to most people. Leger says support for vaccinations is very high, and poll results suggest vaccinated Canadians are growing impatient with those who have refused to get their shot. And the House of Commons Ethics Committee plans to hold an emergency meeting within days now to look at the privacy implication of the Public Health Agency decision. It wants to keep collecting data from millions of mobile phones to understand travel patterns during the COVID pandemic. Tory MP John Brassard says the practice amounts to tracking Canadians. I'm Andrew Boyle for News Anytime. Follow up online at ottawa.citynews.ca.
Good, bad, or complicated.
There's no news in Ottawa and the Valley he won't talk about.
It's the Rob Snow Show on Rogers TV and City News.
101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
It was minus 26.4 degrees at 7 o'clock this morning in Ottawa. Minus 26.4 degrees. It has not been that cold in Ottawa since January 14th of 2018, when it dropped to minus 27.2. So welcome to the coldest day in almost 4 years. We are being tested, my friends. We are being tested. It is like a polar version of Survivor, and I am ready to be voted off the island. Good morning. Welcome to the Rob Snow Show on City News. Yeah, it's cold outside, but the news business is always smoking hot, and we have you covered between now and noon. And thanks for choosing to spend part of your day with us. Coming up, we were hoping to do this yesterday, but it's still worth doing today, exploring the situation with paramedic and ambulance service across the city, across the province. Darryl Wilton is confirmed for this morning from the Paramedic Association, with many reports recently in the news about, well, shortages. Level zero. No available ambulances. Level zero. There was a report in the news this week about a team of paramedics from Gananoque answering a call for service in downtown Ottawa. Almost 2 hours from downtown Ottawa. How does something like that happen? Similar stories appearing in the Toronto news media as well. Offload times at the hospitals continues to be an issue. Mr. Wilton will explain it all for us this morning. Also today, the professor, Professor Ian Lee is back with his weekly appearance. We're going to talk about the healthcare system. Short, long-term fixes for the healthcare system. I have a few thoughts on that. I hope you do too, because that's our Talkback Hour topic today. As we watch our healthcare system struggle mightily under the weight of this pandemic 2 years on, and perhaps never more so than now, because you have this Omicron variant that is so much more contagious, sending many more people to the hospital, and that's being coupled with staff shortages. Frontline healthcare workers missing work. A must-read this morning is Elizabeth Payne in the Ottawa Citizen, in which she highlights the divide between the Ford government and the Ontario Hospital Association. According to the report in the Citizen this morning, the Ford government has been looking at making it mandatory for hospitals to, quote, rehire employees that have been terminated for failing to comply with COVID-19 vaccination policies because of, quote, desperate staff shortages throughout the healthcare system. That is something that is opposed by the Ontario Hospital Association, which claims a move in that direction would just make things worse, would only make the staffing shortage worse, and could compromise patient care. But it's quite a turn of events, isn't it? From, we'll fire you if you don't get vaccinated, to, please come back, please come back, please come back, please come back, even if you're not vaccinated, please come back. We need you. But I guess that's where we are right now. But healthcare, focus for us this morning. We also have to talk, we'll get into this with Professor Lee this morning. There is a lot of ink being spilled about the idea that the United States of America, is on the verge of another civil war. Some of the headlines just in the last 24, 48 hours, NPR, imagine another civil war, but this time in every state. The Guardian, is the United States really headed for another civil war? CNN, is America headed to civil war or secession? The New York Times, will America descend into another civil war? The Washington Post, is America headed to a new civil war? Politico, we are in a new civil war. They are. News to me. We'll get the professor's take on that. Seems a bit overdone to me, but there you have it. Syndicated columnist Michael Taube back with us this morning, my friend on the right side of things. Great column in the National Post about the saga down under with Novak Djokovic, the tennis star, and how that could spell the end of the Morrison government in Australia, a conservative government. And with Michael, we'll also talk about Boris Johnson, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Oh, he is in a whole heap of political hurt right now because of BYOB. BYOB. Boris, you're out, buddy. BYOB. Bring your own booze to a house party at number 10 Downing Street. The Prime Minister's residence. And Boris was there because he lives there, and his wife was there, and all of this happened when? In May of 2020, when the UK was under nationwide lockdown, and all social gatherings were banned. And this information, it's all in emails from his principal secretary, like the Gerald Butts of the UK. Emails that were leaked to a British television station. And that story, I'm telling you, it's on the front page of just about every UK newspaper this morning. And nobody does scandal like the British press. Every morning we do the Talkback Hour during the Rob Snow Show between 10 and 11 o'clock. And look, we just take an issue, we kick it around for an hour, and it's a chance for you to have your say on a hot issue. And like I said today, the issue is healthcare. It's like we're watching the healthcare system crumble right in front of our eyes. It wasn't on the most solid footing or the most sustainable funding path to begin with before the pandemic. And now 2 years on, gosh, the news headlines. It sounds like a system that is, frankly, falling apart. Overcrowding, long wait times in any Ontario hospital, in any Canadian hospital. It's not news. That's not news. That's been the status quo for a long time. But what we're seeing now, it's that on steroids. You know, and we're canceling surgeries again. Backlogs growing again. Staff calling it quits. Just won't take it anymore. Can't take it anymore. Getting out of healthcare altogether. And when it comes to the sustainability of the entire system, I mean, it's in doubt, and it's not like we haven't been warned for a long time. Here in Ontario, we had the Drummond report from Don Drummond when Dalton McGuinty was the premier. A report, an in-depth report done by one of the top economists in the country on sustainable health care for Ontario. That report has been gathering dust somewhere for 10 years. The report came out in 2012 about the path we were on. And we all know about the demographics and how we're getting older. And you just can't fight the demographics. The Prime Minister, I mean, he's on the record. He says he doesn't want to talk about healthcare transfers to the provinces until the pandemic is over. But really, is more government money into the same kind of healthcare model, is that really the answer? And every time you even bring up the topic of reforming the Canadian healthcare system, because it's part of our identity, it's part of our mythology, we take pride in the Canadian healthcare system. Every time you bring up the topic of reforming that system, you're accused of wanting to kill Medicare. You must be in favor of American-style healthcare, as if there are only 2 countries in the world and only 2 ways to deliver healthcare to people. Gosh, don't you get the sense healthcare is broken and needs a fix for the long term? Let's kick that around for an hour this morning here on the Rob Snow Show on City News.
I'm blessed to be married to someone who is a scientist and spent a lot of time following what was happening over in China ahead of time. So he did give us the heads up that this was coming. Not that we believed him right off the bat, but when it did happen very, very quickly, we were prepared. We had hand sanitizer and we were set up to not close our doors. So we locked the kitchen down at Wellington Street, but we left this kitchen open. We put in protocols immediately. We only allowed our very small crew of 4 or 5 people in at the time. No deliveries were allowed to come in or out of the building without, they just weren't allowed in and out of the building. So we met them at the loading dock and had very strict protocols in place right away. We had masks and hand sanitizer and the whole thing. So we're very lucky from that perspective, and we're able to, learn as we went as far as doing small, individually packed caterings, the frozen soup program, food for the Ottawa mission. So we didn't have to close the kitchen and then learn how to reopen it. We just were able to modify and shift as we needed to. Because of our partnership with the Ottawa mission, we were able to very quickly help support them. They were able to send us some product and some supplies, so it wasn't a burden on our business, and we were able to supply the staffing and the packaging to help produce that when they needed it the most. And we produced about 1,400 meals a week to complement their meals, and we started our soup program right away. We realized very quickly that there was a need in the community to get together and all work together, not only to support local, but also just to support all the people that were suddenly in a position of, being locked down and not being able to get out. So by starting that soup program, our community, our clients got online and started making donations for the soups, and we were able to produce the soups and get them back out to people that needed it. We're right now currently making 150 liters of soup per week, but we've made, I would say, 5,000 or 6,000, easily since the pandemic. Probably more. I'd have to do the math, but lots. I think everybody in the city has to be very aware of how blessed we were to have great weather this summer and people were able to get out and about, and that's going to shift. So we do have to be much more aware of who our most vulnerable is, and I really think we have to work together as groups. There are so many organizations in the city that are doing something and contributing and working together, and I think it doesn't matter who, but see what you can do to just step up and help them, whatever it is, whether it's driving or delivering food, or someone has extra zucchini in their garden, or if they can afford to donate some money to any of these organizations. I just think we all have to work together. We're smarter and wiser than we were the first time.
Strong voice.
Strong opinions.
Rob Snow Show returns on Rogers TV and City News.
101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
Darryl Wilton is president of the Ontario Paramedic Association and the Professional Paramedic Association of Ottawa. Good morning.
Good morning, Rob. Thanks for having me on again.
How is the current situation with COVID-19 affecting paramedic service in Ottawa?
Yeah, I'm sure you've heard of the increase that's hitting the hospitals with the Omicron variant. And when it hits the hospitals, there's a domino effect, and it ends up hitting the paramedics next. So it's something that we were anticipating. We've seen it hitting in other cities before here. It's always a matter of time before the weather hits us as well. And it's definitely taking a toll on paramedics.
Okay. What sort of toll? How are you being impacted?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I know when you're doing these interviews, you like to tend to can things up in a nice, clear, and concise way for your listeners, and I'm going to try to do that, but it's complicated. People have to remember at the same time it's very complicated. So since the beginning of the pandemic, paramedics haven't just been responding to 911 calls. That's what we've been doing. I've been at this for 25 years, and 911 is a core business for paramedics. But when the healthcare system started to collapse, paramedics were called to work in other contexts of healthcare. So an example of that, the first one is the long-term care settings. And in provinces that didn't have surge capacity from paramedics, they called in the Canadian Armed Forces. In Ontario, as soon as the PSWs got infected and RPNs got infected and RNs got infected and couldn't come into work anymore, some of them hospitalized and some of them tragically died, paramedics were called to work in the long-term care settings. And we were doing that on our days off, 24 hours around the clock. The second context of healthcare was community paramedics. So this is paramedics providing hospital-level care in private residences and nursing homes, and helping in those settings. Paramedics were also called up to do COVID swabbing and work on COVID vaccination teams, and we've been doing that since the vaccines have been available. Like, you know, you and I are on the show today, January 11th, and we're pretty much 1 year since the vaccines have been around. And the fourth context of healthcare was Operation Remote Immunity, where Ontario paramedics were flown up north to the far north to vaccinate communities on remote fly-in reserves who didn't have other access to healthcare. And the fifth context of healthcare, which is pretty sure what you're calling me about today, is emergency departments. So due to staffing shortages in the hospitals, offload delays have been affecting paramedics, and we now find ourselves working in a fifth additional context of healthcare, which is staffing the emergency departments where we can no longer hand off our patients. Where offload delays have been around for a decade, worse now than ever before, and we're now finding paramedics staffing emergency departments for hours on end every single day. And this is the impact that it's having on paramedics. We're stretched thin. We haven't added staff to be able to work in these other areas. This is something that every Ontario paramedic has stepped up to do out of the goodness of their own heart on their days off work, and that's to be there for communities. And it's been 22 months, and I'll tell you, it's been hard.
How common is level zero?
Well, level zero it's not new. It's been around for a while. What we're seeing is daily occurrences with level zero. And, sometimes what you have to remember is, if you're looking at a city, you could look at Toronto, you could look at Ottawa, even when we're not at a level zero, we're usually very close to it. And that's been our reality. We did have a little bit of a lull this fall. So, I'm sure people can relate to things like the CFL had the Grey Cup in Hamilton. And that's a good example of a little lull where people were able to get together and cases were down. Come into the Christmas holidays, I think a lot of people, including us, just underestimated the devastating impact this new variant would have on the population and the number of cases that we'd see. And these cases prevent people from going to work. They end up keeping people at home. They don't have access to health care, and they call 911, and that impacts our services. So part of that's call volume, and the other part is paramedics being stuck in the hospital. So even if we're not at a level zero, we're often very close to it. And we're seeing major cities around Ontario who have either no ambulances to respond to medical emergencies, or they have very few, or they are relying on the goodness of their neighbors in surrounding municipalities.
Okay. This situation with offloading at the hospitals, as you say, it's certainly not new. I've been doing stories on that for a very long time now. The time it takes to offload a patient, get back out onto the roads and answering other calls. Give me an example how that plays out on a day-to-day basis in Ottawa. A paramedic team has a patient in the ambulance. They take it to the hospital. How long before those paramedics are back out on the road taking another call?
Yeah, so what the hospitals are doing quickly is triaging the paramedics and getting them entered into their system. So they know which patients are there, what the acuity of those patients are, and then what happens next is there's a log jam. And that log jam is multifaceted. Some of it is from admissions. So that's patients tying up beds in the emergency departments who should be admitted to a floor, except there's no space, so they can't send them to the floors. Some of that has to do with discharges. So patients who should be going to a long-term care facility or rehab are stuck in the hospitals when they should be elsewhere. Some of that is due to staffing shortages, and we've seen shortages of nurses and shortages of physicians. And, that's not unreasonable. That's been affecting the entire healthcare sector with the Omicron variant.
Sure.
And when those issues start to compound in the hospital, those dominoes fall from the top of the building, from administration all the way down to the emergency department, and they pile up at the entrance. And paramedics are unable to get around the dominoes. So we get stuck in the garages at the hospitals, sometimes with, 8, 10, 12 ambulances there, sometimes more.
For how long? For how long, sir?
Hours, 4 hours, 6 hours. And the hospital staff are working hard trying to create space, but the reality is there's just too many people coming through the doors, whether it's by paramedics or the public, and we're not able to get out into the community. We're stuck there while the community is uncovered with no resources. And there's people at the other end of that who've waited an equal amount of time to get an ambulance, because you think when there's paramedics tied up at the hospital, there's somebody else at the other end of a 911 call who's waiting for those paramedics to clear to be able to go get them in the community.
There was a news report this week. A paramedic team from Gananoque, almost 2 hours away, answered a call in downtown Ottawa because of, I guess, because of shortages, right? How common is that?
Far too common. So Ontario has built into the provincial statute in the Ambulance Act, just so everybody can understand, a shared service agreement. And the shared service agreement permits paramedics to go outside of their catchment areas to provide support in surrounding areas. And this creates a seamless delivery in the province of Ontario so that people can always have access to medical resources in a time of need. Now, when this was first put together and built into the Ambulance Act, it made sense because the thought would be, I'll give you an example. If a Via Rail train were to derail near Cornwall and the Cornwall, Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry paramedics were overwhelmed with too many patients, it would make sense that they would call on their neighbors for an isolated critical incident to assist them during a multi-casualty incident. And it makes sense for that. What it doesn't make sense for is the daily usage of paramedics from surrounding services when there's not enough resources embedded in some of the bigger cities. And this is what happens in the large cities is they end up, all throughout Ontario, the larger cities end up relying on their neighbors to pick up the calls in the suburbs and the surrounding areas of the city. And that thereby leaves the other municipalities uncovered with no paramedics. So this wasn't something that was ever designed to be a daily occurrence. This wasn't something that we were going to rely on by the hour. This definitely wasn't something by design where, back when the Ambulance Act was written in 1990, that somebody thought this would be great if Ottawa happens to hit a level 0. We can just call on Gananoque to do an emergency call downtown. This is not the intent of that legislation, but it does reveal how stressed the entire healthcare system is at this time. And it does reveal that there are not enough resources in place anywhere in healthcare, and it's caught all of us off guard. This is something that takes years of preparation. We were clearly at all levels of healthcare underprepared for, and we're having trouble keeping up.
Thank you for your time this morning.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Greatly appreciated, sir. Yep, Darryl Wilton, President, Ontario Paramedic Association and Professional Paramedic Association of Ottawa. The Professor, Ian Lee, after the news on the Rob Snow Show on City News.
In Ottawa and the Valley. This is City News, now on 101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
It's Tuesday, January 11th. Good morning. I'm Andrew Boyle. Right now, in Ottawa, minus 26, Smiths Falls, minus 25, feeling colder in the wind, and here's what's making news this hour. Ottawa hospitals reporting another surge in COVID patients in their ICUs today. 465 patients in the intensive care. That's an increase of 27 from yesterday. Over half of them are ventilated. There are also 80 new admissions to hospital across the province just in the last day. The head of the Paramedics Association says level 0 is becoming a reality more often these days. That's a level when there is no immediate access to an ambulance. Darryl Wilton tells the Rob Snow Show more people are staying at home, so when a medical emergency happens, paramedics are called. Getting the ambulance back on the road continues to be an even bigger frustration. Wilton says there is a bottleneck at hospital waiting to get the patient offloaded into hospital care. That's when the ambulance is cleared to get back into service. He says that also leaves patients who have called for an ambulance waiting even longer. It is the coldest start to a day this year. In fact, for some time in Ottawa, bitter Arctic chill will only last until this evening, then a gradual warm-up to -1 tomorrow. Then we dip back into the minus teens. City News Time, 9:32. I'm Andrew Boyle for News Anytime. Follow up online at ottawa.citynews.ca.
The world is changing.
So keep up with Rob.
The Rob Snow Show returns on Rogers TV and City News, 101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
I just noticed the town of Perth is tweeting water main break. Oh boy. Sherbrooke Street, North Street. Sherbrooke and North Street in Perth will soon be your next local neighborhood skating rink. with these temperatures. Professor Ian Lee is back with us, Carleton University Sprott School of Business. Good morning.
Good morning, Rob.
Yeah, nice to hear from you. Let's talk about healthcare reform.
Yes.
Does it need to be reformed?
Of course.
Okay.
I mean, I'd say of course.
Of course, okay.
Not just the headline news that we're hearing, because some people say, well, what are you talking about? That's just COVID. This is, a once-in-a-century thing.
Right.
The Canadian healthcare model or system has been failing for a very, very long time. Jeffrey Simpson, the very, very distinguished Globe and Mail journalist for, 30-odd years, 40 years, he wrote books on this, the most recent one just before he retired, and he had hard empirical data from the OECD and an organization, for those who want to Google it, called the Commonwealth Fund. And it's essentially a Medicare or healthcare think tank. And they compare the wealthy countries, the OECD countries, the high-income countries. Mm-hmm. And we are second from the bottom in terms of on a whole series of metrics, wait times for surgeries and so forth. So they've got a whole bunch of metrics you can go and look at and decide if you think they're legitimate metrics. And we come second from the bottom of the high-income countries that they've evaluated. But we are second from the top in terms of the amount we spend on healthcare as a percentage of GDP. So we spend enormous amounts, even compared to other wealthy countries, high-income countries. And I'm talking on a per-person basis. So don't get confused, anybody listening saying, well, of course the U.S. spends more because they've got more people. We're talking per-person spend,
per capita. Yeah.
And so we spend more than almost anybody, with the exception of the States, by the way, per capita. And we've got terrible results. And so... and this has been documented over and over. The OECD has this. The Fraser think tank has data on this. And so then the question is, where are we going to go?
Right. What are some options then?
Well, I mean, the one you hear a lot, and I don't support, by the way, is the adoption of the American system. And I don't think I think that the people opposed to any changes try and demonize critics, and they say, oh, you just want to bring in the American system. And I don't think anyone advocates that. Some, I'm not one of them, are advocating two-tier. And two-tier is where you have a public system running side by side with a private system. People say, well, that's American. Well, actually, every OECD country has two-tier except Canada. Every OECD country, including Sweden, New Zealand, Finland, Denmark, have two-tier. Having said that, Rob, I'm not advocating that. I did a paper, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago.
You're not advocating for that. You're not
I am advocating something different, but still reform. And it was in a paper I did for MacDonald-Laurie Institute. And by sheer happenstance, Janice McKinnon, the former NDP finance minister in Saskatchewan, wrote a similar paper around the same time. And what I was advocating, and others have advocated it too, I'm not trying to say I'm the only one who thought of this. I think there's lots of people. And that is a lot more decentralized medicine through clinics, but funded through the single-payer model. And in other words, OHIP will continue to pay the bill. Whether the Ottawa General Hospital is doing your knee replacement or a private hip and knee clinic, who cares if the OHIP, the Ontario Health Ministry, sets the price for the reimbursement, regulates the service as they do now. Who cares who's delivering it? Now, this has been advocated in the past, and the public sector unions have come out with campaigns that have just been vicious, and they've been, forgive me for being so blunt, they've been downright dishonest.
Okay.
They have said, this is American privatization, and I want to rely on an authority that they should be willing to accept, and that is none other than the very liberal and very progressive Hillary Clinton, who argued in the Obama years when they were reforming health care. She said she was a strong advocate of the Canadian model of single payer. And she said, I'm not talking, she said, to allay the fears of doctors and private hospitals. She said, I'm not talking about nationalizing you. She said, who cares who delivers the healthcare procedure so long as there's only one payer called the government, no private insurance companies.
Right, okay.
And so when you have a decentralized
So, for example, the last time I went for a colonoscopy, I went to a private clinic, but I paid with my OHIP card for a clinic like that. Or a center of excellence that only does knees or hips or orthopedics.
When you think about it, and I think this COVID pandemic is forcing, and there's a lot of doctors I'm hearing over the grapevine from doctors who are talking about revising the model. We've assumed that just about anything other than a sniffle, you go to a hospital. And this is preposterous, if you think about it. Okay. Hospitals are the absolute most expensive way to deliver health care. Yeah. And you say, well, of course you got to go to the hospital. I want to challenge any listener out there who thinks that. I understand going to the hospital for cancer, heart attack, stroke. You're in a car accident and you're in a million pieces. I get that. Why on earth am I going to the doctors at the Riverside Rheumatology Clinic are fantastic. But what on earth are they doing in a hospital? Why don't we have a decentralized clinic on Maryville Road in a strip mall, and another on St. Joseph Boulevard in Orleans, and another in Canada? In other words, why are we delivering routine, non-life-threatening services in a hospital? Okay. They should be removing all of those things and decentralizing them into clinics that specialize. And this is done in many, many countries. So this is not a radical idea. When you centralize everything in a hospital, first off, that's where sick people are, and you get sicker when you go to a hospital, I think.
Yes, yeah.
And secondly, it's the most expensive form of
But let me ask you, I get that. On a fundamental basis, as someone who has repeatedly said, I love the free market, should I be able to buy my own health care in Canada?
As you know, the reason I, in my paper, argued against it wasn't because I'm against the free market. I looked at, because I'm always empirical, I'm looking at evidence-based data. Right. And I looked at a series of polls done over many, many years, so it wasn't a one snapshot that I'm cherry-picking. Okay. And the support of Canadians for the Canadian model of healthcare is really remarkable. 85, 90, 93%. Really? And so I argued in my paper that anyone who advocates two-tier doesn't have, pardon me, but doesn't have a snowball's chance in hell of getting it past the court of public opinion. So why be Don Quixote and bang your head against windmills that are not going to
I see.
blow?
You're being more pragmatic. Should I be able to buy my own?
I'm not philosophically opposed to two-tier. If Sweden, if it's good enough for Sweden and Australia and New Zealand and Germany and France.
Yeah.
These are considered to be very progressive countries.
Of course.
I don't see if they can have two-tier, why we can't have two-tier, but I don't think it's politically feasible, at least not at this point in time.
Okay. Healthcare insurance? What's your...
Well, we have
feeling
health care.
there? Yeah.
Yeah,
we have supplementary insurance.
We do. You know, the unions, again, and I'm not trying to beat up on them. Remember, I'm a member of a union at Carleton, but I hate it when they are dishonest. And they say, we just want pure public health care. We've never had pure public health care. We have private doctors' offices in Canada. They are not on the payroll of OHIP. We have private, we don't nationalize Siemens or General Electric to buy X-ray scanners and CAT scanners. We don't buy construction companies to build hospitals. We outsource to all kinds of private sector companies that supply hospitals. And so what we're talking about is the supply chain. And you don't have to have everything done in a hospital. We can have it done by private delivery. Then we can have the debate, Rob, of, okay, does the bill go
Should we have
to
private
OHIP?
hospitals, though?
Or do
should there be private hospitals?
You know, I've lived twice in the United States and on sabbatical.
Okay.
And 2.5 years in California, and I did use the healthcare system because I have arthritis. And I can tell you, I broke my collarbone. I tripped and fell in a parking lot on one of those stupid concrete curbs. And I was rushed off to the San Diego, at UC San Diego, which is a world-class university and private hospital there. And I'm not kidding you. I thought I died and gone to heaven. I mean, they had music playing, and they had living room sofas.
It's like you're in a hotel room.
Like 7-star. And they had me in and out. They'd x-rayed me. I mean, I never waited a second.
Yeah.
The ambulance picked me up within 3 minutes.
Yeah.
No exaggeration. I was in the hospital within 10 minutes or 7 minutes.
Yeah.
And they had me slam back the whole 9 yards, evaluated, everything done. And 60 minutes later. I mean, I thought it was illegal to treat patients that efficiently.
How much did that cost and who paid?
They gave me a bill when I left the clinic. They said, now here's your bill. How would you like to pay, sir? And it was $2,000 US. I remember this. This was 2003.
Okay.
And I had insurance because I was at Cal State Monterey, and they paid 80%. So it was like private employer,
like a workplace benefits
insurance.
kind of thing. Yeah. Okay.
And I paid the difference.
You paid the difference. Okay.
So it was about, whatever, 20%, so $400. And I didn't begrudge it at all. I got first class, just unbelievable treatment. Unbelievable. So, there's advantages and disadvantages to both two-tier and one-tier. I've been in China, as you know, I teach there every year. I had a really, really bad cold, 4 or 5 years ago, and I went into taken to I thought it was a clinic, turned out to be a private Chinese hospital in Shanghai, and I'm not kidding you, the treatment was unbelievable. I started talking to the doctor, and he spoke excellent English. He was Chinese, and I said, where did you go to school? Kind of a leading question, right? Oh, he said, I went to Buffalo. So we started talking about the Buffalo Sabres and the Buffalo Bills.
Right. Interesting.
And I'm in Shanghai. Yeah. And then when I walked out to the front, they said, here's your invoice. Now, how would you like to pay, sir? Do you have a credit card? And they charged me. And I paid it on my credit card and then claimed it back from my travel insurance. So, we demonize, and there are people who demonize private health care. But, if you can go to a private hospital, why is it that people with a lot of income go to private hospitals? Because they're trying to give themselves bad treatment? I don't think so.
Okay, one more thing. The federal health minister, Mr. Duclos, suggested last week that the provinces should be exploring mandatory COVID-19 vaccination for everyone. Now, you've been very hard on the unvaccinated people. I've taken the angry calls. People mad at you, they yell at me. But do you support that?
Well, I think it's more nuanced than that. Just first off, I haven't been hard on unvaccinated people. I've never, ever, ever said that they should be forced to have a needle put in their arm against their will. Never have I said that. So I don't know why people are getting angry. I've said, you can go and drink yourself silly until you're seeing triple or quadruple as long as you do it in your own house. But you can't get in a car and drive down the road and hit somebody and kill somebody while you're blindly drunk. Yeah. Everybody understands that is illegal. I'm just drawing the same analogy. But I understand why it's so, it gets some people upset. At the same time, the stats are crystal clear. And I've looked at the CDC stats, and I'm talking very, very recent stats, not cherry-picked. So I'm just looking very vaccinated versus unvaccinated. Mm-hmm. And I'm only looking at going into hospitals and dying. two different statistics. The unvaccinated today in the United States, using the massive data set from the United States, if you are unvaccinated and if you get COVID, you have a 20 times higher probability of death, of dying. And so my argument for vaccine mandates isn't because I'm trying to argue that we can stop the spread of COVID. That's long gone. It's all over the country. It's so we can reduce the rate of hospitalization and death. And I'll put it really bluntly. I am not yet ready to die. That's why I got vaccinated. I didn't do it to save Canada.
But you're kind of dancing around it. Mandatory COVID vaccines?
Vaccinated to save the country.
You're dancing around it. Just answer the question. Come on. COVID vaccine, mandatory COVID vaccines for the general public?
No, I've already answered your question.
Okay.
I have.
Okay.
You should not be allowed to enter any public building except hospitals, pharmacies, and doctors' offices without a vaccine. That's not a prohibition. That's not mandatory. You have the right to walk around on the streets without a vaccine. You have the right to stay home, just like you can stay home and get drunk. You don't need anybody's permission, but you can't get in a car drunk.
Gotcha, yeah.
You shouldn't be allowed to go into any kind of a building, office building, university building, college, anywhere, if you are not vaccinated, because I don't want to die.
Okay.
It's just that simple.
Gotcha. When we come back, we'll talk about the state of affairs in the United States. Is it a country on the verge of civil war? The professor on that next. Rob Snow Show, City News.
It's such a beautiful field because it's all natural. I'm able to talk to a lot of people who are going through different journeys of health where they really don't know where to start, where to begin. And I'm happy and grateful to have all this knowledge where I can actually help them and guide them. So, of course, medications have a great place in our system, but even so do natural therapies, which have been around for centuries and centuries. Like, old time, ancient times, everything, herbs grew, everything was done with nature, all healing was done with nature. So I'm totally in love with all the elements with nature. In our beautiful village of Manatik, the Manatik Natural Market, you can find tremendous different things. So we have herbs, we have vitamins, we have natural body care, we do infrared sauna therapy, nutrition counseling, acupuncture, Bowen therapy, energy healing. So we're like a wellness hub along with being a full health food store. We are 1 year into pandemic since it started last year in March. It was a shock. Usually I see things coming, and I definitely did not see that coming. Golden Root is a product that I created 4 years ago, actually for my kids, just for immune system, overall health. And it just took off with certain friends of mine who had cancer or some severe issues, and they started finding that it was really helping them from different tests they had done with their doctor. And I knew I had something really special. So then I went through the proper procedure of being able to sell it. So it's actually, I'm not allowed to make it anymore in my house. 4 years ago, and it is made in a Health Canada approved lab, and then it comes to me. And what Golden Root is a formulation of turmeric, ginger, lavender, oregano, and black pepper, all food grade, which is the most bioavailable turmeric in the market right now for pain, inflammation, digestion, immune system, concussion, liver health, and brain health. So, and it tastes like salad dressing. We do a lot of in-house, so we make our in-house concoctions of teas. You can come here, tell us what your health issues are, and we can blend it right there. And there's some that are already prepared beforehand for sleeping, for anxiety, for different things. And in that bar, we basically make cold brew teas and cold brew nitrogen coffee. And again, it's all local. Everything we do is local, and as many herbs we can find locally as well. If a client can't come out, we'll go out of our way to deliver it. And you're getting that personal touch when you come in. If you have an issue, we will listen and help you. We're very, very active in the community, so we would like the same thing back for the community to come to.
Fun.
The Rob Snow Show returns
On Rogers TV and City News, 101.1 FM.
and 1310 AM.
Back with the professor, part two, Ian Lee, professor of management at the Sprott School of Business at Carleton University, with us every Tuesday morning. So I sent you all the news stories and think pieces in the last 24, 48 hours that I could find in the news media. There's quite a few of them that speculate that the United States of America, is on the verge of a civil war. NPR, The Guardian, CNN, The Times, The Post, all speculate. Hey, are we on the verge of a civil war in the United States? Is the United States on the verge of a civil war? What are your thoughts on that?
I've been following this with just greater and greater fascination at how the progressives and some liberals are becoming progressively more unhinged. Unhinged.
Okay. All right.
If you read them, and I've read every one, I mean, CNN has an article a day, basically. So does the New York Times. Professor Thomas Homer Dixon, who I respect, by the way, at Royal Roads, wrote this. I mean, it was just so over the top. I mean, I thought it was a satire. I thought
we talked about that last
satirizing
week.
the people saying this. The American polity is cracked and might collapse. Good God in heaven, people.
Could be a dictatorship. Within 10 years, it could be a dictatorship, I think he said, right?
This is a load of nonsense. This is just so fatuous. In my lifetime, I figure I've crossed the U.S. border from Canada over 500 times. I've been going there since I was a child. My parents would take us for lunches on the St. Lawrence on the U.S. side. I've lived twice in the United States, once in Washington, D.C., and at Cal State Monterey for 2.5 years. And I have gone on road trips to 44 of 50 U.S. states. I would respectfully suggest, channeling my inner David Brooks, that most journalists in the national liberal media and professors at elite universities have never been outside their bubbles, meaning the Chicagos, the San Franciscos, the New York Cities, the Torontos, the Ottawas, the Montreals. I'm willing to bet serious money that they've never traveled to rural Texas in a car, or rural Southern Carolina, or rural Northern Carolina, or rural Pennsylvania, or rural Ohio. I'm being very serious. And this is just all this rhetoric about the U.S. is on the edge of civil war. This is just a ginned up, more sophisticated version of Hillary Clinton's characterization of those who voted against her or disagreed with her as deplorables. These are the unwashed. These are the ordinary people that, drive pickup trucks and, good God, watch or go to football games. How awful are they? And this, I just think this is just absolute snobism on steroids by progressives who wouldn't know a working class person if the person hit them on the side of the head with a shovel. I mean, I really mean that. You read this, and they're operating at 50, 100,000 feet. Some people have written me, said, don't you agree that the U.S. is on the edge of civil war? I said, first off, can you please send me the addresses where they're organizing? To have a civil war, you need lots of people, right? Millions and millions of people.
Right.
So where are they meeting and coordinating their conspiracy to overthrow the government? Let me throw a couple of other facts to you.
Okay.
Looked it up.
Yep.
1.6 million uniformed soldiers in the U.S. military establishment sworn to uphold the Constitution. And they've got 25,000 nukes. And there's over 7 million public servants in the federal government of the United States, sworn to uphold the president. Now, can somebody explain to me concretely, not at 50 or 100,000 feet or 5 miles high, how and where are you going to do a civil war to overthrow the government of the United States? This is so preposterously idiotic. This is unhinged progressives who are letting their fantasies run wild because they hate Trump so much and they don't feel he was punished adequately. And listen, I'm not here to defend Trump. I think he's a wacko.
No. But do you think he has been punished adequately?
Well, that's up to the Americans. They have their own system. They have their own.
Right.
I don't believe there was an insurrection on January the 6th.
You don't?
No, I don't.
No.
There were 2,000 crazy people.
Right.
And some of them with guns. That's not a civil war, people. That's called a violent protest.
Okay.
And
a riot.
The United States has a history going back to the origins of their country of violence. And, I mean, Homer Dixon says, look at all the people with guns in the United States and look at the violence. That's been there from the beginning of the country. They had a war against the British. They shot and killed the Brits to push them out of the country. It's always been a violent society. That's the origins and the culture. It's the Wild West mystique and so forth. That does not mean there's going to be a civil war. I've got one more piece of advice for those people who really believe in this unhinged theory.
Okay.
Just sit at home and watch a football game like I did last night. The wonderful Georgia Dogs.
Right.
70 1,000 people were in that stadium. Now, were they organizing a Civil War conspiracy? And the millions and millions of people at home watching that game? What about the Rose Bowl a week ago? What about the playoffs coming this weekend where there's going to be, I looked up the ESPN attendance numbers for the whole year for the NFL. Over 1 million per team. Now, if they're all out there, because these are the unwashed people that drive pickup trucks and go to football games, if they're out there organizing a civil war, where are they doing it? Are they doing it at the football games? Of course, I'm being sarcastic. Of course, I'm
Maybe they're doing it at Lambeau. Maybe they're...
Yeah, they're doing it at Lambeau. Listen, everybody, there's no civil war. The Americans have always been boisterous. They're loud.
Okay. Yes.
They argue and fight.
Right.
One person wrote me and said, very disapprovingly, very contemptuously of the Americans, he said, good God, they can't even agree on the color of yogurt. Well, yeah, that's right. It's called democracy. Oh, my goodness.
I didn't know that was controversial, the color of yogurt. Okay.
It's called democracy, by the way.
Yeah.
And the Americans right now and the elites, progressives, really are upset because they saw the Virginia and other polling data, and the elites in the Democratic Party are writing op-eds saying, hey, everybody, we're going to get wiped out this fall in November in the off-year elections because people just aren't buying what we're offering. We're offering to defund the police. We're offering to shut down ICE and no longer enforce the border. And ordinary Americans, including Latinos and blacks, are saying, no, thank you. And I think they're terrified. They know that there's an electoral apocalypse coming this fall, and so now they're fighting back. I really think they're fighting back by trying to demonize conservatives. And this has a long history going back to Reagan. When I was there and starting my PhD in 1984, and there were all kinds of very serious professors and PhD students who were absolutely convinced and said so publicly, Ronald Reagan was going to start World War III, a nuclear war. Not maybe.
Well, and they also thought Ronald Reagan was an idiot, right? A lightweight, intellectual lightweight.
And remember, they said about George Bush that he was going to implement fascism in the United States. Fascism. I mean, this is the demonization of conservatives by progressives and liberals because they understand that there's a lot of people that don't buy the message of progressive woke policies. Okay. And this is driving them crazy.
All right.
This is my theory of why.
So I suspect on Sunday night you're going to sit down, you're going to watch Kansas City and Pittsburgh, and you're watching Mahomes.
I'm going to watch my Mahomes go out and send
Big Ben away
into retirement.
Yeah, into retirement. Okay,
that's right.
Fair enough. It's well deserved.
To the Super Bowl to take on Aaron Rodgers, my other team. So I will be able to say my team won the Super Bowl even before the Super Bowl happens because you see, my two teams will be there and one will have to win, right?
Yeah. Okay. You know, most people only have one team.
I've got two.
Yeah,
it's called hedging my bets. One in the AFC, one in the NFC.
Okay.
That way, my team is guaranteed to win, you see, if they both get there.
I know. Okay. All right. We'll talk next week. We'll see how things look. Thank you, Professor. Always a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Right,
from Carleton University, Ian Lee. Professor Ian Lee in the School of Management at the Sprott School at Carleton. Talk back hour. How do you fix healthcare? Let's kick that around for an hour. 750-1310, Rob Snow, Show City News.
news in Ottawa and the Valley. This is City News, now on 101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
It's Tuesday, January 11th. Good morning. I'm Andrew Boyle. Right now, under that extreme cold warning and feeling much colder in the wind, it's minus 25 in Ottawa, minus 24 in Smiths Falls. Here's what's making news in Ottawa and the Valley. Another increase in both hospitalizations and ICU patients being reported today right across the province. City News reporter Momin Qureshi with the latest figures.
465 patients have been admitted to the ICU with COVID-related issues, 80 new admissions in one day. That's the highest since the pandemic started. Now, this, of course, comes as there are several staffing-related issues as frontline workers are not immune to the virus, so they're getting sick with the virus and having to go home and isolate and stay away, and that's causing a lot of issues. Now, we're going to hear the latest from the Minister of Health, Christine Elliott, as well as the CEO of Ontario Health, giving us an update at 12:30. This comes as experts continue to stress the importance of getting that third booster dose. So if you haven't done that already, get yourself an appointment and get that booster dose, because the data shows that it will help you hopefully from staying out of the hospital if you do contract COVID-19. So again, that news conference is coming up at 12:30, plus new data is coming out after 10 o'clock. We'll bring you all those details when we have it. Momin Qureshi, City News.
Now, Justin Trudeau says this country will have enough COVID-19 vaccines for anyone eligible to receive a fourth dose if needed. The Prime Minister spoke with provincial and territorial leaders yesterday. A statement issued by his office says he assured them Canada has secured enough shots for the third and potential fourth round of vaccinations. The statement says the feds will do all it can to help provinces and territories cope with wave 5 of this COVID pandemic as infections fueled by the Omicron variant threaten to overwhelm our healthcare systems. The federal government has said provinces and territories will receive a combined 140 million rapid tests this month, although the statement did not provide any new details on when deliveries will be scheduled. City News time at 10:03. Let's get the details right now on this Arctic blast with meteorologist Jill Taylor.
Extreme cold warning continues. Risk of frostbite as well. The high today just minus 18. Very cold wind chill values. Exposed skin can freeze in just 10 to 30 minutes. Chance of flurries tonight, minus 19 for the low, but the temperatures will slowly rise overnight. Tomorrow, sun and cloud and up to minus 1. For today, the high, minus 18.
And right now, feeling colder in the wind. It's minus 26 in Ottawa, minus 25 in Smiths Falls. Now, as much as of eastern and southern Ontario, along with most of Quebec, shivering with these wind chills this morning, the U.S. Northeast is getting it too. New York City resident, this one, says the temperatures are very uncomfortable.
It's extremely cold, and me being born in Jamaica where it's very hot, it's very hard to adjust because I have my gloves on and my hands are still numb.
Now, temperatures are expected to moderate this evening and reach minus 1 for a high tomorrow. The latest music event to be canceled due to COVID is Winter Jazz Fest. This had been scheduled to run for a couple of weekends, the last one in January, then the first one in February. Director of Marketing says they've had to cancel the program, though. Suzanne Zalahi says they are continuing, though, with plans for the summer TD Ottawa Jazz Festival. I'm Andrew Boyle for News Anytime. Follow up online at ottawa.citynews.ca.
It's time to talk back
on the Rob Snow Show.
Have your say and call now.
613-750-1310.
How would you fix the healthcare system? Yeah, we only take on the easy jobs around here. The Talk Back Hour, Rob Snow Show, City News, 750-1310, 750-1310, 613-750-1310. For example, two big things, for example, okay? Should people who can afford to pay for their own health care be allowed to pay for their own health care? Or buy health care insurance? Or go to private hospitals? And would you be willing to pay more in tax, pay higher taxes, to keep funding the current system we have and keep it exactly the way it is now? Okay. 750-1310, 750-1310, 613-750-1310. Should people who can afford to pay for their own health care be allowed to pay for their own health care? Buy health care insurance, go to private hospitals. Would you be willing to pay more tax This is kind of the other side. Or would you be willing to pay more tax, higher taxes, to keep funding the current system and just keep it the way it is right now? Okay, I want to talk about the pandemic through kind of a wider lens and take a look at how we deliver health care. Because we heard it from the head of the Paramedic Association. The words he used, the healthcare system is collapsing, is what Mr. Wilton said from the Ottawa Paramedic Association. The healthcare system is collapsing right in front of our eyes. And I take no joy in that. Nobody takes any joy in watching this happen. We all know that hospitals are managed chaos at the best of times, and these are not the best of times. Dealing with long waits and overcrowding, nothing new. The pandemic, as with so many other things, it's just amplified the issue. It took what was already a precarious state of affairs and made it worse. Okay. We used to say, before anyone ever heard of coronavirus, healthcare is at the tipping point. Healthcare is at the tipping point. And then COVID came along and just tipped it right over. What are we going to do? What are we going to do with the Canadian healthcare system? And if we're not going to have this conversation now, then when is it worth having? If not now. 750-1310. And I want to be clear, okay? As we begin the discussion this morning, none of my criticisms with the state of affairs with healthcare, they're in no way meant to be a slight against anyone working in the healthcare system. They're not. Everyone is doing the best they can with what they have to work with. But it seems obvious now that what they have to work with it's not up to the task. And my fear is that, if anything, it's just a sign of things to come, because as a country, we're getting older. The country's getting older. And the older we get, the more we consume of healthcare. And more tax dollars are required to fund the healthcare system. So that means we have to have a serious discussion. It seems political leaders, at least in the Prime Minister's office, aren't interested in having the conversation right now. But we have to have a serious conversation about how we fund health care in this country. We either change how it's funded, or we have to look at paying a lot more in tax. Okay, there has to be a new health care tax or something to keep the current system that we have, just to keep it afloat. Okay, and the writing has been on the wall for that for decades. Governments of every stripe have been warned for decades, literally decades, about the demographics, okay, the gray tsunami, not working in our favor. Okay, so how do you fix health care? 750-1310, 750-1310. Up first this morning is John. Good morning, John. You're on City News.
Oh, good morning, Rob.
How would you fix health care?
Well, as a citizen who uses it, we can only act as a consumer of a product, and the product is healthcare. Mm-hmm. And as a consumer, if the product doesn't work, you get the right to complain. So I had planned to kind of rantus Maximus this morning.
Go ahead and rantus Maximus, John. Don't let me hold you back. Just don't use any dirty words, okay?
I think people are tired of being tired.
Tired of being tired, yeah.
I think the crux of all of this is get some staff. I mean, they're working the hell out of the people they have, and have. It's more than just 2 years. It was before COVID.
Okay.
I mean, I'm pushing 70.
Right.
And I'm getting kind of concerned about this. Luckily, I'm like one of these old Toyotas that goes 400,000 miles, and nothing ever goes wrong with it. I'm lucky that way. I don't have any major problems, but, if I do, this is going to get weird, because I'm not sure, am I going to end up having to wait, a whole day for an ambulance or something. I mean, it's just, they got to hire some nurses.
Hire some nurses.
Have to hire doctors.
Well, when you start talking about hiring people or paying people more, we're having there's this raging thing going on right now with the nurses over Bill 124, which caps their salary increases to 1%, right? Even though we have inflation running at 4%. So we're basically asking our nurses to take a pay cut, right? So, but to do something with Bill 124 or to hire more nurses or hire more paramedics or hire more doctors, whatever, all of that costs money, right? All costs money. So, and the government doesn't have any money. The government only has your money, John. Yeah. So are you willing to pay more in tax?
I would be.
You would be?
Well, to be quite honest, it depends on how efficiently the money's used. If you go to Scandinavia and you go to places like Finland, what they pay and what they get is a different story. They're just so much more efficient.
More efficient. And, okay. Should you be able to pay for your own health care? Forget about paying higher taxes. Pay for your own health care. Keep your own money and pay for your own health care. Yeah, and go to your own hospital.
Yeah, that could be done with a two-tier system, but sometimes that doesn't work either. I worked in the public service for years, and the second you go to, I was in procurement many times, and the second that you say you're the public service, the price just suddenly goes up. Okay, so a lot of private firms who would supplement the healthcare system would find out that, this is part of OHIP or it's part of the public service healthcare plan. Poof, up goes the price again. I mean, legally, there has to be some kind of, I'm not sure what the term is because I'm not a lawyer, but there would have to be some kind of control over pricing, staffing, and everything to keep the prices realistic.
Okay. All right. Thank you, John. Thank you, John. Thank you. Not a bad try. I know it's a complicated topic. And there are no easy answers, but we have to let's at least have the conversation and kick around some issues here. Phil, you're on City News. Phil.
Good morning, Phil.
Yep. How would you fix healthcare?
I'll start with the second question. Would you be willing to pay more tax for healthcare?
Yeah.
Not in the condition that it's in, not in the state that it's being run.
Okay.
I wouldn't be. I would be. We pay trillions in Ontario for healthcare, and we keep on hearing this argument that, well, do we want to end up in the same scenario as the United States in a two-tiered system? Folks, we're in a two-tiered system as it is.
Well, I think there are more than two tiers, but nevertheless,
that's right.
Should you be able to buy your own healthcare with your own money? Go to your own hospital.
Yes, I believe that there should be private health care available for the people that can afford it, and that would relieve, in the beginning of this health care pandemic, we can relieve some of the strain on the system by going to a two-tiered, you pay as you go. People are going for MRIs to Kingston right now and paying for it. Let's all be honest about what's going on. When you need health care now, if you have money, you'll get it. If you don't, you wait. You wait in the hospital. Healthcare, what were they calling it, Rob, a while back? Hallway care.
Hallway healthcare, yeah.
So what are we, alternating? Are we alternating and pretending like it's not happening?
Yeah, yep. Okay, Phil. Thank you, Phil. Thank you. Okay, let's move along here. 750-1310, 750-1310, healthcare, the topic of the Talkback Hour. Robert.
Hello.
Morning, Robert. How would you fix healthcare?
Retroactively, what I would have done, it's too late now, but when the pandemic started, all of the money that I would have put into CERB, into all of those programs, I would have kept the economy open, put that money into healthcare.
Oh, okay. All right.
And no, I'm not willing to pay more taxes.
Don't want to pay more. You wouldn't pay more tax? Okay.
No. Okay. And what I support private health care? Yeah, of course. It's your own money. You can do with it. You can do whatever you want with it.
Whatever you want with it. Okay. Buy your own health care insurance or pay for it with your Visa, whatever the case might be. Private hospitals, you'd be okay with a private hospital? Privately run? Like by a healthcare company? You'd be okay with something like that?
Yeah, I would.
Yeah. To talk about it, almost doesn't it feel kind of like almost un-Canadian to talk about it in those terms, Robert?
Well, the reality is people go to the States for private procedures anyway, so, why don't we just have that here?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Robert. Yeah, interesting discussion so far, and the phones are ringing off the hook, and I'm glad to see that you're at least thinking about it. It's the Rob Snow Show on City News.
I always knew I was going to own my own business, and I've always wanted to have a store. And I sort of figured when the right concept came together at the right time, I would move forward with that plan. And so through doing some environmental initiatives in the restaurant group that I was with prior to opening this store, it just triggered my path towards being more environmentally conscientious and wanting to make more of a difference, and hopefully encouraging, inspiring other people to want to do the same, at which point the idea for All Eco was born. I have some really fun products. I have a really wide spectrum of products. So the things we look for in terms of qualifying products are sustainably made, upcycled, recycled, zero waste, all natural, no harmful chemicals to like the environment or to our bodies. We have like fun stuff, so like really clean burning candles, lots of really natural body care and skin care. I put a real emphasis on Canadian products. I really try to support up and comers, and I always source Canada first. The refill bar is really important to me. It's really huge. I think that's been exciting as well, because I thought it was going to be a real process in convincing people that this is a better way to go. And actually it was just like right away there was a built-in affinity towards doing refill, which has been great. We closed, I think, probably we were closed down by before the second week of March. Just didn't feel we could comfortably or confidently stay open, even though I do sell essential products, like in terms of the cleaning. But we just didn't feel we could make a safe space for ourselves or our customers at that time, and especially with the information we had at the time. So we did close our doors, at which point I did not have a website, because that was I hadn't even scheduled myself to have a website at that point. So that was sort of like full speed moving towards that and trying to drive the business, at the same time still get myself on the map because I was so new. So during that time, as we were building the website, we were still doing a lot of video shopping and private shopping, online shopping, like online phone, text. Any way I could do business, I was doing it. And there was really a nice show of support for my business during that time, which was really, really encouraging. And now, we are fully set up online too.
Talk back.
Hello. On the Rob Snow Show. The phone lines are open at 613-750-1310.
Now, the Rob Snow Show continues.
How do you fix healthcare? How do you fix the Canadian healthcare system? Should people who can afford to buy their own healthcare be allowed to buy their own healthcare or healthcare insurance and go to a private hospital? Would you be willing to pay higher taxes to keep funding the current system and just keep it the way it is right now? Because we do take great pride in the Canadian healthcare system. I would go so far as to say it's part of the Canadian identity, the pride that we have in the healthcare system, the mythology of it all. Tommy Douglas, greatest Canadian, the idea that it's publicly funded, universal. And some people like to think it's the best healthcare system in the world, even though it's not. But it's nice to think that. It's collapsing right now and needs a long-term fix. Mary in the East End. Good morning, Mary.
Good morning. I have a solution for it.
Okay.
I pay taxes. I'm 78.
Yes.
I have a solution that I think that everybody should have the vaccination. If they don't want it, then they have a bucket of money before they go to the hospital, and it's taken in, and whatever that money costs the hospital, including all fares that cost the hospital, take it out of their money bucket.
I see. If you're unvaccinated and end up in the hospitals, you have to pay your bill.
You
pay
better
the bill.
pay it before you go in the hospital.
Yeah, okay. I got you. They're doing that in Singapore right now. If you're unvaccinated, they'll send you the bill. You'll have to pay for your own health care if you're unvaccinated, and you end up in the hospital. So All right, Mary, thank you for your call. 750-1310, 750-1310. I mean, it's not just about the pandemic. It needed a fix before the pandemic. Irene. Good morning, Irene.
We're already paying for health care. Do you remember when in Ontario when we had the OHIP premiums, and then one government got rid of it, and as soon as Dalton McGuinty got in, he put a health care tax on our income tax?
Well, 2 health care taxes. There's an employer health care tax and an employee health care tax, right?
Yeah, right? So we're already paying for it. But the other thing that you talk about 2-tier health care, and it's not allowed. But look at the CEOs of Hydro. Look at our provincial members of Parliament and our politicians. They're going in, they're getting in quicker than you or I. Right? So why should we, the taxpayers, have to pay more money? It's mismanaged. And what really gets me, okay, is this other thing about, I had a doctor in a clinic. Well, she's been getting a fee from the OHIP because I'm part of her team, yet the past 2 years couldn't even get in to see her. We were all sent to go to the hospital, right? Because of COVID.
Right.
So I find this very frustrating, right? What do? You shovel more money at it, but it's been mismanaged ever since Dalton McGuinty was the premier.
Okay.
Like our health care has gone down.
Yeah, and people who voted for Dalton McGuinty would say it was mismanaged and blame it all on Mike Harris, right? So, yeah.
But I mean, they're pointing
and they
fingers.
blame it on Bob Ray.
Yeah, and they keep and they just keep thinking, oh, let's just shovel more money.
Well, more money.
More money, right?
Yeah.
And it's the executives, the CEOs who even work at these hospitals. They're getting bonuses, right? But what are we getting?
Well, I don't know if they get bonuses, but they're making big money. Yeah, big money to run a hospital.
Right?
Yeah, for sure.
And they get incentives. Or they get a cost of living allowance every year or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, they say Tommy Douglas. I read an article many years ago where apparently Tommy Douglas went down to Cape Breton to see how the coal miners, their health care worked. Right? Because the coal miners used to pay into their own private, pay a doctor. Because I remember when my father was a coal miner, right? We got free health care. And that was before 1957.
Before Medicare. Yeah. Okay, interesting. All right. Thank you, Irene. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. No more money for the same system that we have now, she's saying. Mariah, Ottawa. Mariah.
Hi there.
How would you fix health care?
I would say the exact opposite. I think we should funnel more taxes in. I'm of a completely different ilk.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
I think it's very interesting. You mentioned the gray wave earlier and the demographic shifting that has been forecasted for decades, as you rightly mentioned.
Yep.
And it's the same population that wants to decrease taxes, that constantly votes in favor of lower tax platforms in government. So I'm always shocked that the people who need it the most are the ones who don't want to pay into it, and then the folks, I'm not saying just like me, but folks who are of the younger generations don't get the benefit. We're the ones waiting in line. And I'll tell you, because we're less acute, because we're not as critical, we're waiting far longer than our older counterparts. And so it's very frustrating to see that this contradiction in need versus willing to pay in exists here in Canada. So I'm of the opinion that we should all pay more tax and ensure that everyone gets equitable care in Canada. And your other callers were exactly right. The people with big money are flying to the States anyways at really no exorbitant cost to them. So they're getting what they want at the rate they want. I don't think we need to disassemble our system here in Canada so that rich people can get their service without crossing a border. I think that doesn't make sense. They're going to do it anyways. So I'd say more taxes into our system, improve it, and hire voting governments that are going to make sure that the taxes are sent properly. That's all.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fair enough. Yeah. Love the counter opinion there. Downtown, let's take Downtown James. Downtown James.
Morning. I think three points.
Okay.
I think we need to look at best-in-class hybrid medical systems in Europe. Let's just stay away from the American talking about the American system because it gets too emotional. But let's look at Denmark, Sweden, Belgium, all these people that have hybrid systems, and see what we can learn from them. I mean, we already have private surgical hospitals. We have the Schuldeis Clinic. We have the Morgenthaler clinics. They all perform surgeries at our private clinic. So I think we should look to Europe to really, and Australia, et cetera, to see how we really can improve our system in a hybrid nature. Second thing is we need to look at the bureaucracy which is expanding in school boards and in hospitals. There seems to be a trend that anytime there's a little more money sent to them, they hire another vice president or whatever of diversity or something. So the bureaucracy is bloating, and that's a common thing in governments. When more money arrives, they think they can have more sort of executive positions as opposed to front line. The third point is I think we had two education premiers. They called themselves education premiers, McGuinty and Wynne. They poured a lot more money into education than into healthcare because of loud teachers unions, etc. Nurses and doctors can't strike, but teachers unions do.
True enough. Yeah.
And so I would
Good point, James. Good
start
point.
redirecting money over from the education system, or hold that flat and put extra money into what we really need is a healthcare premier. And I really wish our prime minister was not a retired teacher, but instead he was a doctor.
Okay.
All right?
Okay. Yeah. Good stuff.
Have a great
Good
day.
stuff. We need a healthcare premier. Okay. And take one more before halftime here. 750-1310. Darren in Ottawa. You're on City News. Darren.
Hey, Rob.
How would you fix healthcare?
Well, let's call a spade a spade. We have private health care. The vast majority of Canadians go to see their family doctor who runs their own business in a private building that they rent.
Yep.
Why is there this holier-than-thou feeling that when we go to the hospital, we have to go to a building that the province owns or the government owns? Really, it's about funding the services, not about delivery. And if we can separate those, then I think we're okay. We already have a lot of private things going on where people can apply, and if you can afford it, why should you be able to pay your own way? And then all we have to do is fund the folks who can't afford it and not be all tied up with, is that doctor an employee of the province or not? It just doesn't make any sense. And we're already doing it, but we're hung up in this emotional piece.
Yes.
The previous caller talked about not wanting to have an American system and that's not the point. We have too much real estate, and I don't think anybody thinks that the government of Ontario is great at running big infrastructure. They're just not good at it. So why are we continuing to give them the most expensive, the most critical piece of keeping us alive when there's lots of companies out there? Let's just make sure that the prices are right.
Okay. Thank you, Darren. Thank you. All great calls so far. We'll keep it going. We're only halfway there. It's the Talkback Hour, the Rob Snow Show. This is City News.
In Ottawa and the Valley. This is City City News, now on 101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
It's Tuesday, January 11th. Good morning. I'm Andrew Boyle. Right now, under an extreme cold advisory in Ottawa, minus 25, in Smiths Falls, minus 24. Here's what's making news this hour. Another 80 people in hospital today across Ontario, and the number of people now in the ICU has hit 465, an increase of 27 just from yesterday. More than half of them are on ventilators. The province also reporting another 21 deaths from this virus. A lot of talk about possibly needing a fourth dose of COVID vaccine, the Prime Minister assuring provincial and territorial leaders. If that happens, there will be enough to go around. Justin Trudeau also says in a statement from his office, the federal government will do all it can to help out in a possible fifth wave of COVID. It may be little consolation as this polar vortex has us in its grip, but imagine a wind chill of minus 60. That was recorded this morning on Mount Washington in New Hampshire. For us tomorrow, the temperatures will actually improve to a high of -1. Mandatory vaccine policy for any trucker crossing into Canada takes effect on Saturday. Some feel this could eliminate about 25% of drivers that currently bring supplies into Canada from the United States. More on this issue coming up in the 11 o'clock hour on The Rob Snow Show. City News Time, 10:32. I'm Andrew Boyle. For news anytime, follow up online at ottawa.citynews.ca.
It's time to talk back
On The Rob Snow Show.
Have your say and call now.
613-750-1310.
How would you fix healthcare? How would you fix healthcare? Will you be willing to pay more tax, higher taxes to keep funding the current system that we have right now, maintain the status quo, and just hope we can keep it afloat? Or should people who can afford to pay for their own health care be allowed to pay for their own health care out of their own pockets or buy their own health care insurance and go to private hospitals? What would you do to fix health care? What would you do to fix health care? The Canadian healthcare system has not been considered a top-tier healthcare system in global rankings for a long time. When the Canadian system is stacked up alongside its peer countries, Canada, it routinely ranks closer to the bottom than the top. But whenever you raise the topic, you have this false choice that is always put to people. I guess it must be those with a vested interest in maintaining the status quo, that it's only the Canadian healthcare way or the American healthcare way. And if you don't like the Canadian healthcare system, you must want to embrace American-style healthcare, where people go broke because they can't afford to pay for healthcare. As though there are only two countries, Canada and the United States, and only two ways to deliver healthcare. There are lots of countries in the world, lots of different ways to deliver healthcare. It's not an either-or. But should people who can afford to pay for their own health care be allowed to pay for their own health care? Buy health care insurance, go to private hospitals? Are you willing to pay more tax, higher taxes to fund the current system that we have? Just maintain what we have now? Or something else entirely? Sharon in Bell's Corner. Sharon.
Hi, Rob. Well, two comments on fixing health care and yesterday's subject of the people who don't want to get vaccinated.
Yes.
Fixing the healthcare system is a long, drawn-out process, obviously.
Yes. Yep.
Very expensive.
Yep.
I think the people that are currently running it, the heads of hospitals and so forth, have proved, especially over the last 2 years, that they don't know how to run the hospital because they haven't done anything to fix the problems. So they shouldn't be part of the solution. Do I want to pay more taxes? Absolutely not.
No.
People in Canada, there's a lot of smart people who are dumb because they actually believe health care is free. Maybe if they sent us all a fictitious bill showing how much of our taxes that we pay for health care, people would smarten up and realize it's not free. We pay a lot of money for, in some cases, to get health care that is not as good as it should be.
Okay.
And one way to pay for it, my husband always is saying, why not have a health care lottery? People buy lottery tickets all the time. Pass a law, have that, and it has to be dedicated to the hospitals. People love to buy tickets to try and win something. I really think they'd buy them and to support the health care, and then it's not a taxation. It's your choice whether to pay. And on the people that don't want to get vaccinated, the one lady yesterday, and she didn't like, comments against her for not wanting to. But my comment to her is, if she says no to a needle and it just affects her, that's her business. But it doesn't. It affects many of us. And the proof is what went on in the hospitals over the last 2 years, where you couldn't get treatment. You couldn't even get a diagnosis. You couldn't get to see a doctor. And if you were lucky enough or unlucky enough to get a diagnosis, then how do you get the treatment? In some cases, surgeries have been delayed. They claim that about 4,000 to 6,000 people in Canada have died because they were not able to get the treatment. And that's because, for two reasons. The people that won't get vaccinated think it only affects them, but when they get sick, they go take up the bed in the hospital that maybe you or I needed. And the people that run the hospitals were far too quick to shut down the diagnosis, the testing, and all the surgeries. They should have found a way to keep everybody, as safe as possible. So, I think that Professor Lee is right. The only thing you should be able to do if you don't want to get vaccinated is get health care.
Okay.
But you shouldn't have a free run of society, because that affects me. And like Professor Lee said about this, he said, I don't want to die, so why should you have that control, over my life? And one other comment about restaurants. I guess they'll come back online soon. We're one of these people that went for breakfast every day and enjoyed the company. The people ran the restaurant, followed all the rules. It was great. But I didn't know until the last couple of months that people that work in the restaurant, they're all fully masked and so forth, but they ask you if you're vaccinated and you have to prove it. Yeah. We can't ask them. And they don't have to be.
They don't have to be. Yeah. They don't have to be.
So why should people who are handling your food? So I think Doug Ford needs to correct that.
Okay. All right, Sharon. All right. Covered a lot of ground. Good to hear your voice. It's been a while. Thank you for calling, Sharon. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Long-time caller there. Paul in Ottawa. Paul.
An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Okay. I think if we want to improve the healthcare system, especially with the aging demographics, we really have to try to go in and try to reduce the demand on the healthcare system to start with.
Okay.
And, leading, I know this sounds like an easy thing, and I don't know how to implement it, but just leading a healthy lifestyle and not getting sick in the first place, I think, is a great way to do it. Also, I haven't heard this in a few years, so I'm not sure if this is still applicable, but whenever we get a new head of the Canadian Medical Association, the last two, I heard them say changing the way hospitals are funded. In Canada, a hospital, from what I understand, gets its budget up front for the year, and they have to make it last. Where other countries who used to do that switched over to a different funding formula and were able to reduce their waste times by saying, okay, the hospital no longer just gets a chunk of money and you make it last. You now get money based upon the services that you provide. So they changed the incentive in the hospitals from trying to make money last to actually trying to get as many procedures done and through. So, like I said, I heard a couple of heads of the CMA recommend those changes, but that was a few years ago, so I don't know if we've done it or what's happened in that suggestion.
All right, Paul, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, 750-1310. 750-1310. Healthcare in Canada can be a touchy subject, okay, when you're talking about even making the slightest change to the way healthcare is delivered or reform, because you're proposing fiddling around with a sacred cow. It's like you're not even allowed to raise the topic. Think back to the most recent federal election. Remember how the Liberals went after Aaron O'Toole about comments that he made about healthcare during an interview? Chrystia Freeland, right, was labeled fake news. She was labeled fake news, right? You manipulate media manipulation, right? And they started the hashtag two-tier O'Toole. It's catchy, I suppose, but it's not serious, right? It's sloganeering. It's the stuff of bumper stickers, but it's not the stuff of serious public policy. And the idea that there are only two tiers of healthcare in Canada, I find that laughable to begin with. The fact is, and many callers have pointed this out already, The rich have more healthcare options than the middle, and the middle have more healthcare options than the poor, and that's just the way it is. And the public side of the Canadian healthcare system really only covers a visit to the hospital. Just about everything else is privately delivered. You can argue a trip to the family doctor is private healthcare. But what would you do? What would you do? I don't want to get carried away with a rant today. Sharon in Ottawa. Sharon, you're on City News.
Good morning, Rob.
Hi, Sharon. What do you do to fix healthcare?
And actually, I've been thinking about this a lot. I guess what bothers me most about the conversation is it seems to be in our country that you either want to pay more for a system that obviously isn't working, or you want to go to the American system. It seems to be very black and white, and you're demonized.
I don't think it's black.
Even bring it up. But as a former business owner, we had to run efficiently. And if there was a method we were using to do a certain thing and it wasn't working, then you had to find a better method. And I was listening this morning to the head of the paramedics and the problem they're having.
Yes.
And that problem has been going on for decades.
Well, a long time, yeah.
And how is it that either someone in the brain trust provincially or the, $1 million head of the Ottawa hospital hasn't come up with a solution? And I mean, Ottawa or Queensway Carleton finally, after all these years, is starting what they're jokingly calling a private, or not a private, sort of a trial project where they keep one paramedic in the ER.
Okay.
And I thought, oh my God, I remember being in there many, many years ago with my mom, who was older, and we had more than a few visits to emergency. And back then, the paramedics would be lined up. So there's no point in throwing more money at this system.
Okay.
It's got to be... We have to be able to have a conversation. One of your earlier callers...
So this idea you
more money at it.
Pay more tax.
No, and that's not the answer. Because it's a system that is badly managed, it's badly organized, it's badly thought out.
Well, is it badly or is it just insufficiently, though?
No, it's badly thought out. A quick story, friends of ours years ago, their daughter was diagnosed with juvenile diabetes. She was going through CHEO months and months and months, back and forth, never as an inpatient, outpatient, couldn't get her regulated. They ended up, the husband got a job in Austria. So they went there. Daughter was put in hospital immediately. She was there for 2 weeks. They got her blood sugar all regulated, and she was done. Months in the Canadian system with no effect, and 2 weeks, and she was all sorted out. So obviously there are countries who have figured it out.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob.
Okay, Karen in Manotick. Karen, you're on City News.
Yeah, hi. I totally agree with Sharon.
Okay.
I was a nurse at the Civic, and I watched I've worked in the States. Also, I worked for a nonprofit hospice. I was in charge of their supplies, and Medicare would come in and make sure we had everything validated what we used at the Civic. I would take the wrong IV bag and go, wrong one, get another one. The supplies are just flying, like nobody's tracking. There's no checks and balances of our usage because, in a sense, it's not private that's watching every penny. It's kind of like anything with the government. There's no checks and balances of a lot of our programs, They reinvented the wheel. At the time I was there, I believe my floor moved at least 6 times. They said, we'll be better on this floor. We'll be better on that floor. We're going to do this. So there was constant reinventing the wheel.
Okay.
What was I going to say? It's just, and working in that building, it was just daunting. I refer to the Civic as the Titanic. We were rearranging the deck furniture. It is such a failing building itself. I'd stand above the emergency room and watch them repair the flat.
So what do you do to fix that? What do you do to fix that?
What you do is it's already been fixed somewhere. somebody has the exact same population as us, same dynamics. And I thought that's what computers were all about.
Right. Best practices.
Computers could figure this out.
Yeah, best practices. Where are they doing it the best?
It's been done somewhere.
It's been done somewhere, yeah.
And and what my final word is, waiting for health care is not health care.
That's right. The Supreme Court said that almost 20 years ago.
My son is waiting 6 months for an EEG. He lives in Sudbury. And for an EEG, I can do an EEG. A monkey can do an EEG. What are we doing?
Okay.
I'm kidding. I'm sorry. I don't mean to offend EEG people, but it's. I think we are so used to the. It's just nothing's worked, but it's the best system in the world. You know, we don't have to pay for it. Yeah, but watch our pennies, because I cannot believe the waste in the hospitals of we just open stuff and throw it aside. There's no one in the equipment room watching what we're using. It's just unbelievable.
All right. Got to run, Karen. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you, Karen. Yeah, good rant. Okay, we'll be right back. This is the Rob Snow Show. I'm just trying to fix healthcare in an hour on City News.
When it came to opening the business, because I was so young, there was a lot that I didn't know about management, financial management, management of people, all around management, I think is the word that I always come back to. I think that I always had a passion, and I knew that I wanted to create a space for people to get their hair done, but I had no idea, even having studied business management, what it really took to open a business as well as sustain a successful business. So in 2014, I was actually working with Angela Sutcliffe. She was my business coach at the time, and she was like, what's your niche? Like, what separates you from other salons? And when we started to really dig, it was the curls. It was the fact that we work with all curl types: curly, kinky, wavy, coily, which is how we identify our curl types. And then you have straight hair as well, of course. But more than 70% of the world has some sort of curl pattern to their hair. And we just realized that was not being addressed. It wasn't something we learned about in school. So I went to the States and I traveled all over to kind of gain the information that I have now to be able to share it with our clients and as well as with other stylists. So in March, when it came, I thought it was gonna last, a week, 2 weeks, I think it started off at 2 weeks. And I was like, cool, I have 2 weeks to just relax, that's fine. So I was actually in a position where I was not happy, so to say, but I was a little bit happy, to be honest, just because of what I was experiencing personally. Now, when that extension started to happen, it was not a great feeling. It was very uncomfortable not knowing how I was going to support myself financially. So I'm so excited about the Academy. It's something that I started, and I launched it during the pandemic. So I've been teaching for a number of years. I've been educating for a number of years. I educated at Algonquin. I've educated at Versailles Hair Academy. And I've also educated in my own space, in this space and my old space up on Green Bank. And so it was just a continuum of what, I've been doing for these years. When we have a client in our chair, it's not just about making your hair look great. It's about how do you go home and take what we've just taught you and emulate that. So now, with a world where people want to, quote unquote, be diverse and inclusive, what does that really look like in a salon setting? And for me, it looks like being able to invite any curl type, any hair type, really, because I can take care of straight hair types just as well as, I can take care of curls. And we cater to all curl types regardless of what you look like on the outside. We got you.
The phone lines are open at 613-750-1310.
Now, the Rob Snow Show continues.
How do you fix healthcare? How do you fix healthcare? Obviously, we're not going to get it done in an hour, but I've enjoyed the conversation immensely. For example, are you willing to pay higher taxes? Just keep paying higher taxes in order to keep funding the current system, maintain the status quo. Should people who can afford to pay for their own health care be allowed to pay for their own health care or their own health care insurance and go to private hospitals, private clinics, whatever the case might be. Just how do you go about fixing healthcare? Barry, Ottawa. Good morning, Barry. You're on City News.
Good morning, Rob.
How do you fix healthcare, Barry?
Well, a few points I'd like to make, Rob.
Sure.
One main point is I don't think political appointments to become CEOs of hospitals should be allowed. I don't want to mention any names. I don't want to make it sound personal, but I don't think city councilors are qualified or ex-city councilors are qualified to run hospitals. I think the appointments should be made under some kind of review of different doctors, and it should be like a doctor that's close to retirement or something like that that's willing to take on the job of the administrative job of running a hospital, someone with the knowledge of what has to be done. And that way things might be run better. I don't think we should tax more. I think we should just make sure the taxes that are being taken off now, that maybe more of them are put towards our hospitals to repair the system. I also think that in this time of a pandemic that we should have, like a city like Ottawa or Toronto, a large metropolitan area that's got 3 or 4 hospitals within that city. I don't think we should be putting people with other health problems, whether it's cancer, heart surgery, anything like that, shouldn't be put on a back burner.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know how feasible it is, but I mean, these are things that we were talking about almost 2 years ago. Why aren't we, whatever, having a mobile field hospital? MPs, opposition MPs on the Hill right now want to know. The federal government gave SNC Lavalin a $150 million contract for like a field hospital. Nobody's seen or anything to do with this SNC Lavalin mystery hospital. Never existed. Why don't we have a dedicated building to treat COVID or something?
My point is, Rob, that if we got 3 or 4 hospitals in Ottawa and some smaller city only has maybe 1 or 2, that here in Ottawa, Toronto, larger metropolitan areas, that we have one hospital that's not full of people with COVID, that it's dedicated just to doing cancer surgery, heart surgery, stuff like that. So these people that have other afflictions shouldn't be put aside just because of a pandemic. And that way, even people from a smaller metropolitan area that maybe they can't put one hospital aside for doing that, those people could come here or come to Toronto or a larger city to get their health problem and issues taken care of and not just be put on a back burner.
All right. Thank you, Barry. Thank you. Got to run. Rick in Canada. Rick, good morning. You're on City News.
Morning, Rob.
How do you fix healthcare?
I'm down $900 every year on my tax refund since 2004 when Dalton McGuinty introduced his healthcare. He called it premium. But,
at the time.
The courts later proved it was a tax when he got taken to court.
Yeah, because the union said, it's a premium. We don't pay premiums in the union. The employer pays the premium in the union. And then they were forced to admit, it's not really a premium. It's a tax.
Exactly. And there's no way, exactly, sir. And there's no way the employers could afford to foot a huge bill like that. So then he built all kinds of wings on new hospitals, which was a good idea. But then the next thing we knew, we had empty, brand new wings on hospitals because they didn't want to spend the money to staff them with doctors and nurses.
Okay. So you're highlighting problems, but what do you do to fix it? So what do you do to fix it?
In answer to your question, no, I don't want to pay more taxes.
Right.
And I think the first thing they're going to have to do is identify core services, healthcare being one of them, and say the politicians can't touch that money or redirect that money for campaign promises or whatever, so they can get reelected or elected. It's sacrosanct. They can't touch it at all. It's a core service.
Okay.
The other thing is, very quickly, blood testing. You usually have to go and get your annual blood testing.
Sure. I had blood work done that long ago.
2017, I could go down there, get in there, no problems. 3 or 4 people waiting in the room. I haven't been able to get in there for about a year and a half now because the lineups are out the door and around the corner. So my question to you, which you're not going to like, is why, when we're so overtaxed on these healthcare services and no housing and everything else, why did we let 400,000 more people into Canada last year? doesn't make sense.
Doesn't make sense. Okay, well,
Nope.
I don't know. Okay, all right.
Thank you.
That's going to be the plan for a long time. And the fact is, I don't know what healthcare looks like without immigration, to be honest with you. Bill in Ottawa. Bill.
Yeah. Hi, Rob.
Hi, Bill. How do you fix healthcare, Bill?
Well, we have to go to the European model. There's no question.
Right.
I was
a hybrid,
at a fundraiser for fundraiser with Poilievre and O'Toole were present. This was before O'Toole became the leader, and I raised this issue, and they had two answers. One, it's a provincial issue, because this was a federal fundraiser, and the second one was we'd never get elected, and they're worried that it'll create a wedge issue for the other party. They're both worried. The Liberals and the Conservatives are both worried it creates a wedge issue. They'll say, rich people are going to jump the queue and all those sorts of stupid arguments. Mm-hmm. It creates more hospitals, more staff. We get people back from the U.S. Nurses are leaving. Doctors are leaving. In times of pandemic, it's an emergency. We could commandeer those private hospitals, no problem. But there's no leadership.
No vision.
Parties.
No vision.
No vision. No, nothing.
Yeah, I agree.
The Canadian people are being led down because of the politicians.
Yeah.
Anyway,
okay,
that's
Bill.
my rant. Sorry.
Yeah, good one. Rant away. It's the coldest day in 4 years. If you can't rant on this day, when are you allowed? Charles. Morning, Charles.
Hey, good morning.
Hey, Charles, you have 1 minute. I need you to fix the entire Canadian healthcare system.
Okay. Well, I had heard a while back that some of the big high-tech companies were recruiting high-end doctors, and they were coming up with a new plan, a new paradigm. And I think this could be the answer to our healthcare system. But also looking at the U.S. Or the European models and focusing on prevention, putting responsibility back in the people's hands to keep healthy. And even lately, you can call into a doctor and have your appointment. How much that's convenient for me.
Telemedicine, yeah. Okay, very interesting.
I'm not for more taxes for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
It's not working, our system.
Thank you, Charles. Not working. The system is not working. Well, that was a great hour. Enjoyed it very much. We'll be right back after the 11 o'clock news. Rob Snow Show on City News.
WW 1310 AM in Ottawa.
And CJET 1011 FM in Smith Falls and the Valley. Number 1 for local news in Ottawa and the Valley. This is City News, now on 1011 FM and 1310 AM.
It's Tuesday, January 11th. Good morning. I'm Andrew Boyle. Right now in Ottawa, it's minus 25. In Smith Falls, minus 24. And here's what's making news in Ottawa and the Valley. Case counts of COVID continue to drop in Ontario, but the number of admissions to hospital and in particular the intensive care units continues to climb. We get the latest figures from City News reporter Momin Qureshi.
465 adults in the ICUs with COVID at the moment, and experts once again stressing that if you haven't gotten your booster shot yet and you are eligible, you should really make that a priority and get that shot because it can potentially protect you from ending up in the hospital with the virus. Momin Qureshi, City News.
Now, Health Minister Christine Elliott and the CEO from Ontario Health are delivering an update, and that is scheduled for 12:30 this afternoon. We'll have more on COVID in a moment, but first your forecast with meteorologist Jill Taylor.
Extreme cold warning continues. Risk of frostbite as well. The high today just minus 18. Very cold wind chill values. Exposed skin can freeze in just 10 to 30 minutes. Chance of flurries tonight, minus 19 for the low, but the temperatures will slowly rise overnight. Tomorrow, sun and cloud and up to minus 1. For today, the high, minus 18.
And the extreme cold warning has just ended, but still minus 25 in Ottawa, minus 24 in Smith Falls, and feeling colder in the wind. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says the federal government will do all it can to help provinces and territories cope with a fifth wave of this COVID pandemic, as infections fueled by the Omicron variant threaten to overwhelm the healthcare systems.
The Prime Minister spoke with provincial and territorial leaders yesterday, and a statement issued by his office says he assured them there are enough vaccine doses available for all eligible Canadians to receive booster shots. The federal government has said provinces and territories will receive a combined 140 million rapid tests this month, although the statement did not provide any new details on when the deliveries will be scheduled. The statement says Trudeau also emphasized the need to promote support programs, such as the federal wage subsidy, to help people and businesses survive the latest lockdowns and public health restrictions. Laurie Paris, The Canadian Press.
City News Time 11:02. The latest poll by Leger and the Association of Canadian Studies suggests support for the lockdowns are falling as pandemic fatigue rises. Only 56% of respondents agree the governments are making the right decisions to limit the spread of Omicron and keep the health system from being overrun. 62% are satisfied with the federal government pandemic response. That's down, though, about 5% from just the beginning of December. The World Health Organization Regional Director for Europe says there were 7 million new COVID-19 infections in that region last week alone. Hans Klug says the Omicron variant is racing across Europe. He cites estimates from American scientists projecting half the population in Western Europe will be infected sometime in the next 6 to 8 weeks. The latest music event to be canceled due to COVID is Winter Jazz Fest. That was scheduled to run for the 2 weekends, the last in January and the first in February this year. But the director of marketing says they've had to cancel the program. Suzanne Zelahi says they are continuing to work on plans for the summer's TD Ottawa Jazz Festival. And opposition politicians are calling for a police investigation into allegations British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his staff flouted lockdown rules by holding a garden party in May of 2020. ITV in Britain published a leaked email invitation from Johnson's private secretary to dozens of people, asking them to bring their own booze. I'm Andrew Boyle for News Anytime. Follow up online at ottawa.citynews.ca.
He's a pillar of community opinion.
The Rob Snow Show returns
on Rogers TV and City News.
1011 FM
and 1310 AM.
Don't you think if you go to the Prime Minister's house, the booze would already be there? Like, you wouldn't have to bring your own booze to the Prime Minister's house. That's what I would think anyway. Michael Taube is back. Syndicated columnist, Troy Media, Loonie Politics. Great one for the National Post in recent days. Former speechwriter for Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Good morning, Michael Taube.
Hey, good morning, Robin. Thanks for making me laugh right off the start.
It's great. It's great to hear from you.
Yeah, good to speak to you.
We'll talk about Boris in just a minute and
sure.
His problems. I really enjoyed your column for the National Post. Djokovic's legal victory makes a joke of Australia's COVID-19 policy is the headline. You write that it's the sort of political embarrassment that could define Prime Minister Morrison's career. My goodness, troubling for Conservatives today, I guess, is one of the themes. Why could it cause problems for Prime Minister Morrison in Australia?
Well, look, I mean, although obviously some Australians have come out directly and said, what does it matter whether a tennis player, including one who has made, as I point out in my column, screwy comments about science and medicine before, how is that necessarily going to affect his political career? Very briefly, it could, because Australia is one of several countries, including the UK, and many, many years ago, Canada was actually one of them, not as much any longer, but Australia engages in what are called leadership spills. And this basically can be referred to that when you are a prime minister or a party leader, you're supposed to have the confidence of your party caucus. In other words, all the people who represent you, whether they be cabinet ministers, backbenchers, you have to have, generally speaking, 50% plus one or that much support to maintain power, or in some countries, the supporter caucus has to be higher. But regardless, if you ever lose the confidence of your party caucus, you can be turfed out immediately. And in Australia, there have been changes of party leaders and prime ministers in Australia, both for the right-leaning Liberals and the left-leaning Labour Party, and quite a few over the past few years, which have led to wild changes in government leadership, everything. And Scott Morrison is well aware of that fact. And if Scott Morrison cannot control the situation, and he doesn't look like what he does right now, which is a national and international embarrassment over this entire issue, which I'm sure we'll go through a little bit, he actually could be in huge trouble. And his political career could actually end, not because of something that actually happened on his own native soil, but by a tennis player, a tennis star, to be fair, who just came in, challenged his rules on COVID-19, or the country's rules on COVID-19 mandatory vaccination and whatnot, and beat him in court.
When I read your column, I learned a few things, and one of them is I didn't really realize kind of how out there Novak Djokovic is.
Yeah.
Can you just pass along to our listeners who maybe haven't read the column how he claimed to have evidence of gluten intolerance, for example? Yeah. That's quite interesting, actually.
This is pretty wild. And I have to admit, Rob, I had forgot about this. I knew the second comment, which I'll mention as well. But this one on gluten intolerance, I forgot about because, quite frankly, I read his book. So anyway, Novak Djokovic in 2010 wrote a book called Serve to Win. Now, lots of tennis players, Roger Federer, Andre Agassi, Pete Sampras, etc., Arthur Ashe, many of them wrote about their tennis careers, their lives, and Djokovic has every right to do it as well. But he also had some weird passages, including, and I'll take this from the BBC in the UK, reprinted this. I'll do it as a direct quote because I think that's only fair.
Yeah.
So in his book, Serve to Win, Djokovic described how in 2010 he met with a nutritionist who asked him to hold a piece of bread in his left hand while he pressed down on his right arm. Djokovic claimed he was much weaker while holding the bread and cited this as evidence of gluten intolerance.
There you go. Yeah. Gluten intolerance. There you go. Yeah. Just by holding the piece of bread in his hand.
By holding a piece of bread in one arm and one hand. I mean, that's nuts, Rob. I'm sorry.
That's kind of crazy.
With no disrespect to Djokovic as a person, no one's arguing.
No, gluten intolerance is a real thing, but I don't know if that's how you actually go about diagnosing it. That's all.
And here's the second one. Exactly. No, and here's the second one, just in case people have not read my column or haven't seen on the web. Here's the other one. Djokovic has also claimed, and listen to this, quote unquote, that positive thought could cleanse polluted water. And then he also suggests that, again, quote, scientists have proven that molecules in water react to our emotions, unquote. When have they ever done that, Rob? Name one study where you've ever seen something like that. So basically, scientists, so we can cleanse the polluted water by using our emotions, and by holding a piece of bread differently, you can prove that you have gluten intolerance.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that's crazy.
Yeah. But getting back to this Morrison issue, it seems to me as though you also, because you have federalism in Australia, have basically provincial governments and a federal government, and it seems one government wasn't in tune with what the other level of government was doing, and they're also kind of pointing fingers at each other, right? So
and basically what happened is, you're right, the left hand and the right hand were basically not or communicating with one another. There was a real problem in that regard, and you're quite right. Australia, much like Canada, where we have a federal government and provinces, Australia operates with a federal government and state government. And in this case, there seems to be some confusion whether every official was aware that the state of Victoria in Australia actually had jurisdiction to make the decision about medical exemptions. And some of the letters that have been released in various Aussie newspapers, including The Age just a couple days ago, seem to show that a lot of people were very confused, including medical officials, as to what the policy should be, who has the jurisdiction, and what the rules are in terms of people who've had COVID within a period of 6 months or otherwise. What is interesting, though, is that Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister of Australia, was up until January 5th in complete agreement with the position that the state of Victoria and not his government should have jurisdiction. I mean, there's a January 5th interview which basically he directly says, well, this is a matter for the Victoria government. They have provided him, that being Djokovic, with an exemption to come to Australia, and so we then act in accordance with that decision. That's how it works.
Right.
States provide exemptions for people to enter on these bases. So basically, Rob, what this means is whether or not you agree with Novak Djokovic's decision to not be vaccinated and not take COVID-19 vaccines and critique them at times, which, quite frankly, I don't agree with, it seems pretty clear that Djokovic and his team did everything correctly and by the book in terms of signing the proper forms, applying for the medical exemption through the state of Victoria, receiving it. And as they've directly said, we ticked every box and it was correct. So Scott Morrison then all of a sudden, for whatever reason, did a political about-face, changed his position that he had held up until January 5th of this year, and now he just looks completely foolish.
Yeah. Tried to make an example out of him, and it's totally blown up in his face. Now, speaking of how things blowing up, it's certainly blowing up all over the place for Boris Johnson. He's trying to move the country past COVID-19 and have Brits live as normal a life as possible. But all of these things that were happening during the lockdown of 2020 are coming back to bite him. And now there are leaked emails to British television network ITV from his principal secretary. We're going to have a party at 10 Downing Street with the official residence. It's bring your own booze, which is like, I still can't get over that. I'm going to the Prime Minister's place. I have to bring my own booze. Like, are you kidding me? I don't know. I know. If I went to the White House or something.
What's that I for 10 or a draft?
I know, it's preposterous.
And there's an investigation underway, and there's going to be an official report released and everything. It's just so ridiculous. Boris is blowing it here. What do you think about what's going on, Nick? Because it's all over the media. Nobody does scandal like the UK media. So
that's true, especially their tabloids, I agree, which are much more vicious than ours are. Yeah, I know. I mean, again, I don't want to pile on another conservative prime minister, that being Boris Johnson, but he has opened the doors, or really the floodgates, to a vicious series of attacks. And you're right, the Daily Mirror, the Sun, Daily Mail, ITV News, I think either broke it first or Sky did. I don't remember which one, but it doesn't matter. It was, there have been several that have come out and discussed it. It's a mess, and it's a mess because, for various reasons, Boris Johnson, as we know, nearly died from COVID in 2020. He was the first major world leader to get it. And he was in the ICU for a few days, and he even admitted himself it was very touch and go for a while. But thankfully, he pulled through, and he's fine now, obviously. But it's astonishing that this happened under his leadership and his watch, and it was allowed through. I mean, you and I are obviously laughing about the BYOB, and obviously some of the listeners will too, and I find it preposterous as well. But I think what's more preposterous is that they actually did this. Now, to be perfectly fair, and just to go off on a slight tangent, we've seen photos of our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, during periods of time not wearing a mask where, he's pushed it pretty hard too, where he should be. We've seen issues with former U.S. President Donald Trump where that occurred. This is all, during that time when a lot of people caught COVID in the Rose Garden just before the election was held in 2020. We know that there have been world leaders who have put themselves in very poor situations during COVID and should really know better. And whether they make the argument that other people arranged it or that, the cameras were off or that we want to get back to normal in certain ways, why are you, harassing us in this fashion? The fact is that if everybody else, including you, I, and the listeners, all have to wear our masks, be safe, be careful, and follow the various COVID restrictions of our countries, well, then the world leaders themselves, including Boris Johnson, also have to do so. I don't think this is going to cost him his career, Rob, but it is definitely going to shatter his public opinion. It's going to shatter his government. It could cause divisions in his government. He's already lost a few MPs here and there. Not that his majority is in dire jeopardy, but he certainly is in a position now where he can't lose too many more, or it's going to make him look very weak. But interestingly, as I said before with Australia, Britain also has leadership spills as well. And if they get frustrated enough with the way Johnson handles Partygate, as it's being called, his job could be in jeopardy.
Partygate. All right, Partygate. I love it. Thank you. Thank you, Michael Taube. We'll speak next week.
You bet. Take care.
Bye-bye. Syndicated columnist Michael Taube. Wayne Scanlan writes about the Ottawa Senators. Hey, remember them? They might actually play a hockey game this week. Be their first game in 26 days. If it happens, against Calgary on Thursday. He's going to talk about the possibility of the Senators playing another game this week. Rob Snow Show, City News.
My name is Pamela Caillou. I'm a local artist. I'm Métis, and the heritage derives from Algonquin and Huron background. That comes from way, way back from the 1600s. I was trained in school classically, like we studied the masters like Picasso, Michelangelo, Van Gogh, and so you'd have to say it's quite different, my style. What I've done is taken the skills that were taught to me by traditional painting and incorporated that with the Indigenous heritage. My art pieces incorporate the energy and spirit of the Mother Earth in pretty much every single one of them, because I want people to realize, even though we might think we are the masters of the domain here on the planet, that is not the case. It's the Mother Earth that's providing a balance and our causes to live and whatnot. And it's just always see her and remember her and respect her. Well, I try to keep my style different because there are like a handful of Canadian artists that are really well known, like Norval Morrisseau and whatnot, but it's been done. So I kind of want to stay away from the pack, and that's what makes my artwork a little more unique. But at the same time, if you're looking at it, you do know it's Indigenous and you do know it's the woodland style. I usually start by coming up with an idea, which would be, let's say, 4 days. Well, it depends what's inspiring me at the time. It could be a lot of trees, it could be water, it could be the medicine wheel. I would choose a subject and try to really incorporate what it is I want people to see from that. So then from there, I would have sketchbooks and I do little sketches of everything because the canvas is expansive. So you don't want to start something and have to throw it away. And then from there, I go on to the bigger piece on the canvas. Once I have on my sketches the direction I want to take my artwork in. I chose a lot of vibrant colors for the pieces because if somebody is willing to make the commitment to have my piece of work in their home, I would actually like them to come home after a long, hard day, and some days aren't so great, to look at something that's very joyful.
Ottawa icon.
The Rob Snow Show returns
on Rogers TV and City News.
101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
The Ottawa Senators are supposed to play their next two games against the Alberta teams. Against Calgary on Thursday and then against Edmonton. I guess that would be the late Hockey Night in Canada game for Saturday night. But what are the chances that they will happen? Let's get an update from Wayne Scanlan, who writes about the Ottawa Senators for Sportsnet.ca. Good morning. Yeah, it's great to hear from you. What do you think the chances are? Because I do vaguely remember the Ottawa Senators playing hockey. What do you think the chances are of a Thursday night hockey game?
I think they're looking pretty good, but as I said to David, your producer, these are early days. It's that's 2 days from now. We've seen lots of games canceled between, in the 48 hours or 24 hours leading up to a game, and even the day of. So we'll wait and see, but it's looking good, and I like the way they've got these two games slotted in. That Edmonton game on Saturday that you talked about is already a rescheduled game from Monday, right? So, they've had a whole mess of games canceled. It's honestly hard to keep track. I think it's 13 in total. The one against New Jersey was replayed, so I think there's 12 still to be rescheduled. This team should be halfway through the season now at game 41. They're at game 29. It's just unbelievable.
Okay, yep, and I want to ask you about that. But how is the decision made to postpone a game? Who makes that decision?
Well, it's the NHL.
Okay.
I mean, they've got the final call, but in conjunction with the teams involved and with the health authorities. So it's kind of a multi-pronged thing, and these are canceled for different reasons. There's no conspiracy against the Ottawa Senators or the New York Islanders. Also have had a lot of games canceled, and some of these are because of the Canadian attendance restrictions. A lot of the Ottawa home games are in that boat. The hope is, from Ottawa's perspective, that they can reschedule these games when they can get more than 1,000 people into the building. They could maybe have it half full, or if things go well, maybe even more than that. But a lot of these are because of COVID, and Edmonton had an outbreak recently, and as soon as we saw they'd canceled their practice the day before the game for COVID reasons, you thought, this isn't looking good, and sure enough, the Monday game was canceled.
Yeah. The canceling of the home games because they can't have fans in the stands, that puzzles me. I don't understand why they can't just have the game without fans in the stands.
Well, it's just revenue.
Just revenue. Okay.
They don't want to give up all those tickets that could be sold. I mean, it sends. They don't have the biggest gate, but that's all the more reason that the gates that they can get really matter. So if they could get 9,000 or 10,000 in there, that's a big difference from under 1,000, which is the current rule, or having that thing completely empty. Toronto decided not to sell any tickets. That January, the first game, they decided just to have a few seats available for family, team contacts, that type of thing, rather than try to figure out who among all the least season ticket holders should get tickets. They just said we won't sell any. So the hope is with the attendance thing that they can wait when they can draw some fans and get some revenue.
Okay. So I'm just looking at the standings here and games played, and as you mentioned, the Senators have played 29 games. That's the second fewest in the league.
Right.
Only the Islanders have played fewer games, 28. Some teams have played 38 games. I'm looking here. The Vegas and Anaheim have played 38 games, and you said there are about a dozen games postponed or something. So how do you make up games like that? Are we going to see in Ottawa, if, say, things improve, I mean, is it possible that the Ottawa Senators could be playing every night down the stretch?
Well, not every night. I mean, the Players Association wouldn't go for that.
Okay.
But there will be back-to-backs. And don't forget, the entire month of February is more or less up for grabs because they canceled the Olympic participation. So that break will be really interesting. Like, if you look right now, Ottawa's only got one game scheduled for the month of February, and that's February the 1st. Other than that, it's wide open. Okay. Now, there's an All-Star game in there, which we can question the league's wisdom for staging that. But on February the 5th, that weekend is All-Star weekend, so they can't have NHL games that weekend. So now the question will be, do the players get more of a break than just the All-Star weekend? If you can use a lot of February, you can schedule these games in. Ottawa would play basically every other night. You know, they've got 53 games left to play, and I keep changing the math on this because it went from 112 days to 110, and now it's around 105, and all depending on how much of a break they allow in February. But you could squeeze in all the games. My concern is if there's just no
room for error.
For error, exactly. So if they cancel any more games, you could see a point where they look at Ottawa and maybe the Islanders and say, you know what, you guys are pretty far from the playoff picture anyway. Maybe you'll just play 76 games and we'll kind of average out your point total per game.
Right.
And that's what you'll end up with. I could see that happening, but it's really not what the league wants. The league wants a nice, tidy GP, games played, 82 under every single team in the league. That's their hope.
If the Ottawa Senators play on Thursday, what kind of lineup would Sens fans be looking at?
Oh, the lineup's getting better all the time.
Good.
Because with all these delays, as the coach, DJ Smith says, there's only 2 or 3 players now, Brady Tkachuk foremost among them, who haven't tested positive at this point. And I don't know if you're aware, but once you test positive, you don't have to test again for 90 days. Oh. So these guys are in the clear now. But these guys that were testing positive last week, the week before, in November, they've got a 90-day window where they don't have to be tested. So as long as they're not getting sick and they're not getting fevered or anything that looks like a COVID symptom, they don't have. If they got something minor or no symptoms, they don't have to be tested. So they're going to have a very healthy roster the rest of the way, except playing all these games can be hazardous to your health. So that would be my concern about their health. They've got an extra few players. They've got a taxi squad. Really, everybody's available now. But I'd be worried about players getting banged up because they've got so many games to play in such a small window.
Okay. Thank you so much, Wayne. Great to hear from you.
Anytime, Rob.
Yep, learned a lot there. That's Wayne Scanlan from Sportsnet.ca, where he writes about the Ottawa Senators. We're back right after the news. We're talking about the job market on City News.
is City News, now on 101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
It's Tuesday, January 11th. Good morning. I'm Alex Gouge. Right now in Ottawa, it's minus 24, feeling like minus 31. And in Smiths Falls, it's minus 23, feeling like minus 28. Here's what's making news this hour. Ontario health officials say 80 more people in the province have been hospitalized with COVID-19, while the number of ICU admissions has reached 465. More than half of those ICU patients are on ventilators. The province is also confirming 21 more deaths linked to the virus. This comes as Health Minister Christine Elliott and the CEO from Ontario Health are set to deliver an update this afternoon at 12:30. New school guidance from the Ontario government says that only certain students and teachers who show symptoms of COVID-19 will have access to PCR tests when schools reopen to in-person learning next week. The Ministry of Health document says take-home PCR self-collection kits will only be provided to elementary and secondary students, as well as education staff who become symptomatic while at school. The test kits will only be given to students or staff who have fever or chills, a cough, shortness of breath, or a loss of taste or smell, or two or more of the less common symptoms such as runny nose, sore throat, or muscle aches. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is already talking about fourth doses of COVID-19 vaccines. A statement issued following his virtual meeting with provincial and territorial leaders yesterday says the government has secured enough vaccine doses for every eligible resident to get a fourth dose if needed. City News Time, 11:32. I'm Alex Gouge. For news anytime, follow up online at ottawa.citynews.ca.
Strong voice.
Strong opinions.
Rob Snow Show returns on Rogers TV and City News.
101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
So all sorts of news headlines out of the United States about the Great Resignation and American workers quitting their jobs in record numbers. Millions by the month leaving their jobs. Is that happening here? To what extent? Let's explore this issue right now at 11:32 here on City News with our guest. Our guest is Brendon Bernard, senior economist with Indeed. Good morning.
Morning. Thanks for having me.
Hey, it's great to hear from you.
Yeah,
is the Great Resignation happening in Canada?
I would say the great would probably be an exaggeration. I think things are returning to more normal levels of labor churn, but a huge wave of people leaving their jobs. I think it's pretty early to call that in Canada. And let me go into a little more detail what I mean here.
Sure.
So when people leave their jobs, they can do so. There are two main branches of leaving your job. You can leave your job to jump to a new job, so job hopping. And then you can leave your job to stop working entirely. In both cases, throughout most of the pandemic, we've seen Canadians leaving their jobs at either similar rates to pre-pandemic and in many cases lower rates than what we saw in, let's say, 2019. And that's actually especially the case when it comes to job hopping, which is one of the two common ways people leave their jobs to another job. Up until the past few months, job hopping rates have actually been relatively low compared to pre-pandemic levels. I think that could be a combination of just the fact that in this world of work where some jobs are remote, other jobs you're dealing with COVID restrictions and awkwardness of working on site. Switching employers might not be as easy as it was pre-pandemic, and there could be sort of awkwardness in terms of the onboarding process. I remember being in a clothing store a few months ago where the salesperson was telling me that she hadn't actually interacted with some of her new coworkers without a mask on, so hadn't actually seen their face. And then in the office world, you're dealing work from home, so onboarding is a bit different. And so so we've seen a little bit of movement more recently where people are job hopping to a bit more like they did pre-pandemic, but not quite the same. And then on the flip side, we've got resignations to leaving the workforce. And there I'd say the story is pretty similar. Those rates are starting to creep back up to more normal levels, but overall, I wouldn't call this a huge wave of Great Recession that we've been hearing in the U.S.
Is it a better employment market, though, for workers right now who are looking for jobs?
So are we talking about in Canada?
In Canada,
I think the Canadian labor market is doing surprisingly well, actually.
Okay, all right.
We saw this huge plunge in employment at the start of the pandemic. But in the most recent months we've had, the latest data we have is for early December, so pre-Omicron wave. The Canadian employment rate of core age workers, that's 25 to 54-year-olds, as well as youth, that's those under 25 years old. The share of those two population groups who were working in the month was actually higher than it was pre-pandemic. That's a pretty impressive recovery given the plunge that we had in the spring of 2020. So overall, that suggests that people are finding work. And when we look at job postings on Indeed, job postings are way above pre-pandemic levels. And this is across a whole range of areas of the economy. So it's a pretty good time for job seekers to be looking for new work. And now is the time, and when labor market conditions are in good shape, that's a time when you want to be on the job hunt, because those are when there are opportunities to move up the career ladder, to find potentially better pay or better working conditions. And so I'm hoping in 2022, especially, once we get through this latest wave, we see Canadian job hopping sort of make up for some of its lost time. We see people getting their career tracks in the right direction again.
Certainly, the government data suggests there are a lot of job openings. That the struggle right now is to try and find people. StatsCan releases this report on a quarterly basis, and the most recent report was Q3 2021. So,
that's right.
But at the end of 2020, there were 560,000 job vacancies, and about a year later, there were almost 1 million. It was 912,000 job vacancies. How do you explain so many job vacancies?
A huge increase.
Huge increase.
And when we were tracking similar numbers on Indeed in terms of job postings, and the increase looks pretty comparable. In some cases, in that StatCan data, one of the key sources of that increase is this huge surge in job postings in the accommodation and food service sector.
Okay.
And in that area, I think part of the story is that there was this huge shutdown that we had in 2020, indoor dining and all these different sort of like recreational activities really shut down. Workers lost their jobs. Many moved to different areas of the economy. And as these sectors restarted again, there was sort of not all the people who lost their jobs are ready to just jump back into those work. And so that explains kind of like that helps explain that sort of shut down and restart on and off switch explains some of the activity in certain areas of the economy. But if we look elsewhere, I think things are a bit different. So for example, job openings in healthcare, really strong. And there, I think that's almost a continuation of pre-pandemic trends, but then taken to the next level where there's just a lot of demand for healthcare workers. And some people just might not, for a variety of reasons, the job seekers to fill those roles might not be there. Either people are staying put in their existing roles, or might be leaving the sector, or not entering the sector, or just having trouble keeping up with demand. And then we have other areas of the economy, like the tech world, where we're seeing on Indeed job postings really strong. And that's just, I would say, more of a sign of just a booming industry. Jobs in tech in Canada are growing really quickly. It's one of the real bright spots of the Canadian labor market. And even though overall employment is growing quickly, I think it's tough for the workforce to keep up with booming demand. And so you can see jobs in tech companies rise, but for individual employers, it can still mean that it's difficult to fill these positions just because they're competing with so many other companies to try and fill these spots.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, we're going to actually have a spokesperson for the trucking industry coming on next. There's a lot of demand in that industry as well. So, but that's a different story. So, when it comes to this idea of a great resignation, it's more of an American thing than a Canadian thing, right? Fair enough, right? That comes through loud and clear in your data.
At the aggregate level, I think so. Job hopping, not the same as
job hopping, but it is happening, right? Sure. But it is happening. Can you
in the U.S.
In Canada, job hopping, just not to the same extent. Right, not to the same.
I'd say more recently we're starting to see it. Up until kind of like earlier this year, job hopping was relatively subdued. But that doesn't mean for like individual cases that it's not happening. That people aren't getting burnt out or reevaluating their life circumstances. It's just that there's so many things going on at the same time that they're driving the aggregate numbers.
I wonder when a worker decides to leave one job and either go on a job hunt or already has a better job lined up or what they think is a better job, why they leave the job that they're in. I mean, money must have something to do with it, work-life balance.
Absolutely.
What about work from home? Is that a big thing, do you think? The ability to work from home?
I think it is. Now, big in terms of is sort of like a relative question.
Okay.
Is it going to be big compared to money? Well, probably not quite as important as the paycheck and the career advancement opportunities, but it's a factor, and all these factors combine together. I think the way I'd think about it is if you have two similar jobs, but one is offering more flexibility on the work from home front, that's a job attribute that if the other position doesn't offer, then that's going to tilt the scales in the job seeker's mind towards a role that offers more flexibility. And we see on Indeed, job seekers. The share of searches, just including remote work-related terms, is well above pre-pandemic levels. And I think when current teleworkers are surveyed about what sort of mode of work they prefer, even once the pandemic ends, we hear it's really common to hear people sort of saying they prefer a hybrid option. Maybe not full remote where you're never going into an office, but at least the opportunity to work from home a few times a week. I think it creates flexibility when it comes to commuting. It can potentially, lower the number of sick days that workers might make. Someone might be on a bubble, a little under the weather. Where if they don't have to make the commute, they might be able to work from home fine that day. But if they were going to the office, that would be sort of like an extra strain on them. And so just when we're thinking about the attributes of jobs and why people switch jobs, there's a whole suite of factors, with pay being probably number one, but flexibility another factor that different people will value differently. But overall, in terms of the kind of like suite of broad picture compensation, more flexibility is going to generally trump less flexibility. And so for employers who are really particularly tight on everyone is going to be returning to office 5 days a week, they could find some challenges both in recruiting workers and also retaining existing staff, given demand for employers in lots of areas of the economy is quite strong at the moment.
Wow, it's very interesting. Thank you so much, Mr. Bernard. Very great to have you on this morning to explain it to us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Brendon Bernard is senior economist with Indeed. Coming up next, it's the president of the Canadian Trucking Alliance on vaccine mandates for truck drivers. That's next on the Rob Snow Show on City News.
We just took over this business about a few weeks prior to the pandemic, but we've been loving the community, the people, very friendly, but it's been very difficult starting up a new business, just the time that we did, but I'm sure it's the same everywhere. We did take a broken business, which doesn't help us, but we thought we believe in what we do. We're very passionate about food, and we just really wanted to share the Iraqi culture through our food. All our recipes are homemade, so this is very unique. Usually you hear restaurants, shops, it's all frozen food or prepared food. So nothing here is prepared, everything is homemade. We get our meat and produce from a local farm. So supporting local is the way to go. We are supporting all the way. And our meat are actually marinated the day of, so it's as fresh as can be. Quality ingredients and everything is made from scratch. I get a lot of people when they come in, they say it tastes like Middle Eastern, like back home. So for you to have been to Iraq and had the food there, you can really like compare and see the similarity. We do like to focus on healthy. So our recipes, not only the homemade, again, everything is from scratch, but we have like from combos and to like small sandwiches. One of our favorites and very popular is the chicken salad and the beef salad. So now you're getting all the protein and all these amazing ingredients that we all need. During this time, I find a lot of people are sitting at home and not enough movement. So to come here and get something healthy other than go elsewhere and just put, what's not so good for our bodies, makes a huge difference. So we have shawarma sandwiches, combos. I mean, if you're looking for a meal to feed your family, I would highly recommend the family platter. It comes literally with everything, with potatoes, with rice, with chicken, with beef, and we don't charge extra for mix. I know a lot of places do. Here we just add everything to your platter. And lots of healthy choices for sure. We're very passionate about food, and for our small family business, it's been good. Like I said, it's a little struggle, but we are not a chained restaurant.
The world is changing.
So keep up with Rob.
The Rob Snow Show returns on Rogers TV and City News, 101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
Steve Laskowski is president of the Canadian Trucking Alliance, and he is joining us this morning to talk about the vaccine mandate for cross-border truckers. Good morning, sir. Nice to hear from you. Thanks for taking the time.
No, thanks for having me on the show today, Rob.
Well, the Trudeau government seems intent on moving ahead with this, no matter what it does to the supply chain, no matter what it means to your members, people working in the industry. What could be the impact of this vaccine mandate for cross-border truck drivers?
Sure, Rob. I'll talk about the mandate and its impact, but I'll just open up with the clarification comment. This is a bilateral issue. So what is going to happen is this week, this Saturday on the 15th, the Government of Canada will implement its mandate, and then the following week, it's fully expected on the 22nd that the U.S. government will introduce its cross-border mandate. So the complication here is, in this policy discussion, is we're involved in a bilateral discussion, not just in a unilateral discussion with the Government of Canada.
Okay.
So for that, just for clarification
Sure
purposes.
thing. Yeah. Well, thank you for
Which is a real critical issue here, because we need both governments to move in the same direction, obviously, because it impacts both of our economies. So with regards to its impact, prior to the COVID crisis, we had a driver shortage. During the COVID crisis, that driver shortage increased, but we also had a compounding factor that we were all very aware of now in Canada and the United States, is that our supply chains are fractured, not just the trucking portion of the supply chain. All aspects of the supply chain are having challenges. So our message to both governments, both Washington and Ottawa, was work with the supply chains, not just the trucking industry, but members of the supply chain, to implement this mandate at a time that's more conducive to not adding further disruption. The question isn't, or the comment from us and others isn't, if this mandate gets implemented, it's when. There are very few countries around the world today that don't have a mandate in place with regards to entry-exit requirements around COVID vaccinations. Very few. So the issue for us is let's work together as supply chains. Let's work together as governments on both sides of the border to make sure that $460 billion worth of trade isn't further disrupted because of the issues we're already working through, and find a date to implement this mandate that's more conducive to the supply chain and allows the supply chain to adjust to the loss of drivers, because that will happen eventually, or it will happen. It's going to happen on the 15th, but if it's pushed out, it'll happen then. But it'll allow people, both not just in our industry, but more importantly, the members of the supply chain that are trying to secure trucking transportation, to adjust how they managed their factories or whatever their business is to reduce capacity.
Okay. How many employees could be affected by this?
So in Canada, there's 120,000 Canadian truck drivers that cross the Canada-U.S. border. And just for information purposes for your listeners, there's 40,000 U.S. drivers that cross into Canada, moving Canada-U.S. freight. We estimate, or in our industry, and it's important for your listeners to understand, there is no increased vaccination hesitancy in the trucking industry, more so than Canadian society. So our vaccination rates in our industry are very reflective of the national rate, which I believe is around 85-86% these days, and also reflective of the provincial rates, which sometimes can be higher and sometimes can be lower. And it also, without getting into the minutia, is very reflective of regional pockets of provinces, right? Because we've all seen that depending upon where you live, there's different approaches, or what we'll call vaccine hesitancy. So what we're expecting is anywhere between 10 and 15% of that 120,000 drivers to exit the system. So that can lead anywhere between 12 and 16,000 drivers.
Wow. And what kind of impact would that have?
So the impact
on the logistics.
Yeah, absolutely. So the impact is already already happening, because the trucking industry is preparing for that. Right. And what's happening in the industry, and more so with our customers, is customers on both sides of the border are understanding and feeling these exit rates as our companies are preparing for it, and some have the ability to be more aggressive in pursuing truck transportation freight, so ensuring that they have their capacity, and others, depending upon the nature of their product and their ability to be aggressive, are having more challenges. So I guess the overall message to the listeners is, depending upon the ability of members of the supply chain to be aggressive, some will feel more of the impacts of this mandate, and some will feel less.
Okay. When I listen to a lot of American radio, the satellite radio in my vehicle. I've mentioned this before. Every second ad is for a trucking company looking to hire employees. And as you mentioned, the staffing shortages in your industry, not new, predate coronavirus, right? Let's say somebody's listening to this and they say, well, I'll become a truck driver because it sounds like it pays pretty well. Good benefits. They talk about you're not on the road all the time. You get guaranteed time at home and all of this kind of stuff. But I guess my question is, how long does it take to become a truck driver?
So that's a very good question. In Ontario, so there's two phases to it. I'll answer the question this way. Okay. There is the pre-licensing phase, which is mandatory, about 103 hours in the province of Ontario that you're required for training before you can go for your license. But then the second part of the equation, after you get your license, doesn't mean that you're ready to work in the trucking industry. Okay. It means you're prepared to work in the trucking industry. So then that's what happens then is that the trucking industry will then employ those drivers that they believe are suitable for working in their companies, and the primary factor will always be around safety, and then they go for in-house training. So it's a period of time, and that's part of the issue here, Rob, about the exit of drivers. We're already short. There was actually a report just issued today by StatsCan and Trucking HR Canada that showed that we're 23% 23,000 drivers short in the third quarter of last year. That means there's 23,000 trucks that should be moving that aren't. And the reason they're not is that one of the equation is that the trucking industry takes it very seriously who they hire and who operates their vehicles. So it does take time, but that's because we want to make sure that everyone behind the wheel is a committed professional to truck safety.
Right. So here it is. We're coming up on the middle of January, like 3 months, 6 months, a year to become a.
So, I think it will really vary.
Okay.
It really does. I know you're looking for a specific number, and that's a fair question.
No, I guess my point is you don't train a truck driver overnight, right?
And thank you for putting it that way. Yeah. That's exactly right. How it works, you're going to start out in the yard. You might then go to some local trucking, so that way they can practice with you, make sure everything is good, move to regional, and then eventually to long haul. There's stages.
Okay. All right. Look, very interesting conversation. I hope it's not as disruptive as it sounds it's going to be, but I fear it will be. Sure, go ahead, sir. Yeah.
No, I think that, Rob, you're absolutely right. And we don't want it. The government of Canada doesn't want it. The government of the United States doesn't want it. We are working through a transitional period of compliance crossing the border, and any kinds of transition comes with bumps. And really what we're trying to do is smooth out those bumps, work together, and make sure that we keep everyone safe, but we keep the economy going. And I think that's an important thing that I have not brought up in here. COVID penetration amongst long-haul truck drivers from the beginning to now is very minimal. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. But we are working with the government of Canada. They're working with us, and we all want what's best for this country and help it grow and help us stay safe.
Great stuff. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All the best. Bye-bye. Steve Laskowski, President, Canadian Trucking Alliance. Sam LaPrade Show is coming up right after the news here on City News.
The Rob Snow Show.
Tune in weekdays starting at 9 on Rogers TV and City News, 101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
Number 1 for local news in Ottawa and the Valley.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line. Email us or connect with us on social media.